Good afternoon and welcome to the 8th Annual Wayne Economic Forum. We are thrilled to be able to have this event again this year after having to cancel last year's. On behalf of the Worcester Area Chamber of Commerce staff and board of directors, I would like to thank each of you in attendance today for the support of what promises to be a very enlightening afternoon. This event would not be possible without these generous sponsors. You'll find them on your screen. Freeman Building Systems, Gojo Industries, MAI Capital Management, Meaden and Moore, One Digital, PNC, Seaman Corporation, Stiefel Adams Reichert Wealth Management Group, Wayne Savings Community Bank, and Westfield Bank. Let's give each of these supporters a round of applause. And our event production today is being done by Clint Sprunger with CW Production and Design. Thank you, Clint. And I would also be remiss if I did not give a special thank you to the forum's founder and godfather, Mr. D. Vadia. For his leadership in not only the creation of the forum, but also faithfully securing our slate of speakers over the last 8 years. So thank you, Dee. Before we get started, I'd like to go over a couple of housekeeping items. First, located at each of your tables are questionnaire sheets. And if you have a question, go ahead and write that down on the sheet. And after the presenter is finished, we will have chamber staff walking around to gather the questions for you during the Q&A session. Also, our schedule calls for 3 brief breaks, which are noted in your program, and during these breaks, we encourage you to socialize and enjoy the snacks and beverages at this side of the room. Also note that at the second break, we will be offering bar service, and that'll be located in the lobby. At this time, I would like to invite Chuck Bateman from Nobletech to the podium to introduce our first speaker.
Good afternoon, everyone. Man, I can't believe it's almost the end of October. You know, 2 things come around in October: Halloween and Cybersecurity Awareness Month. What an auspicious time to take a moment to talk about a topic that we see far too often in the headlines: the worsening cyber threats. And it's my privilege to introduce the first speaker of the afternoon, who is uniquely qualified to talk about this topic at length and in great detail, as this is a subject he's dedicated a good portion of his life studying. Additionally, he, with others, have stationed themselves in the front line of an ever-escalating cyber conflict between nation-state actors and the supply chains and the industries of the U.S. and its allies. What he's seen on the front lines in those trenches would probably make the most experienced of network defenders squirm. And you may ask, why would anyone choose to be on the front lines? It's simple. Our first speaker, he was a Marine, deployed not once but twice to a much scarier front line. It's in his nature to put the safety of others before himself, especially when he knows where his talents will make the most impact. And what is the impact that our first speaker wants to make? Simply and boldly, he wants to make the world a safer place, free from cyber attacks. And you know, of the people who have said these words in the past, he's the first one, I believe, that can actually pull enough people together to make it happen. In fact, it wouldn't be the first time that he had to clean up a mess. When he saw what the cybersecurity industry was wrought with so many distasteful business practices and needed a guiding light to clean it up, it was our next speaker who, along with a few others, wrote an ethical standard to address it and help create trust between security researchers and those being researched. It was his firm belief in security with trustworthiness that led our next speaker to found and co-found 2 of top-notch cybersecurity firms, built on the premise of advancing the industry through quality services, providing powerful security with the highest integrity. Moreover, our next speaker knows the power of education, no matter the medium. He wrote the book most fledgling security researchers pick up for the first time, a manual of sorts to kind of get people started and open doors. He has written or has had a hand in writing most or a good majority of the software tools that are now standard tool sets along the cybersecurity industry. In fact, some of those tools are protecting your networks as I speak right now. Our first speaker, with all of his credentials and the grizzled cyber warrior status, is the most humble of individuals, eager to give advice and encourage others to do their best and to try hard. He's helped foster a new generation of cybersecurity researcher, making himself and his knowledge easily available, as well as setting an example of integrity across the industry. It is through his ironclad integrity and his humble nature that this industry giant has gained the respect and admiration of his peers and those who seek to walk the same path. So when I say he's uniquely qualified to talk to us today about the worsening cyber threats, what I really mean is we would be hard-pressed to find somebody more qualified. When he speaks, industry listens. Please give a warm welcome to the founder of Trusted Sec and the co-founder of Binary Defense, Mr. David Kennedy.
Well, good afternoon. I don't know how I talk after that one. That was a pretty good introduction. No, I really appreciate everybody coming today to talk about cybersecurity. It's what I've dedicated my whole career and life to. I used to work for the military intelligence side of the house at the NSA doing cyber warfare. Did 2 tours in Iraq, 4 intelligence-related missions. In fact, when you saw the shock and awe going on TV, I was already into Iraq, cracking Iraqi cryptography, doing troop movements and allocation of those to understand where all the troops were at and help our troops advance into there. And then later on, was part of the intelligence gathering crew that basically understood where the insurgencies were at. I did forensics on Uday Hussein's computer, Saddam Hussein's computer, a number of others out there, as well as kind of infiltrating the insurgencies and working with teams out there to go after the bad folks, as well as other countries that would want to do harm to the United States. But it's interesting. Over COVID, I haven't gotten to present to a lot of folks in person, so this is really great to be here today to talk about it. And I do want to call somebody up on stage randomly in the audience, and I'll do that around halfway through my presentation, so think about it ahead of time of what that means. But I promise not to show the information that I find, but I'll basically say, hey, how much information can I find about an individual person just by knowing your first and last name, okay? And we'll see how far that goes. And I'm just letting you know I'm like 5,000 for 5,000 on this. So again, I promise not to show any embarrassing videos or pictures or things like that, or you loving cats or dogs or whatever that is, cat memes or dog memes. But I will show you how easy it is to get personal information out there for individuals. Also, caveat, if you see me hunching over, during COVID, I decided to get into powerlifting, and so I can deadlift over 500 pounds, which is not bad for a 39-year-old, right? But when it comes to lifting my son's 50-pound baseball pitching machine, I pulled my back yesterday, so I have no idea how that works. Doesn't make any sense whatsoever. But my whole career, and what we're going to be talking about today is what's going on in cybersecurity, and what are we seeing out there, and what can corporations and companies do to really protect themselves? Because that's the most important thing, right? You see ransomware, you see nation-state attacks, you see China hacking in, and all these things. We'll cover all those topics. But it's important to understand that there are things that we can do from a business perspective to reduce our risk to our organizations and really try to protect ourselves, our employees, our intellectual property, and our well-being. I'm on the news all the time. I was just on CNBC. In fact, I'm going to show you a clip here that I did just yesterday on the latest attacks from Russia. If you're not familiar, a number of years ago, Russia launched an attack against Ukrainian tax software called NotPetya. And it caused about $127 million of damage at FedEx in under 20 seconds, as well as it also targeted a number of different businesses all across the globe that did work in the Ukraine and used this specific piece of software. Then we saw SolarWinds, which is a whole other big one that happened, where they're using trusted partners in our technology to essentially backdoor them and go into our companies because we trust them, right? Supply chain attacks are one of the most severe attacks that we're seeing out there right now. And so Russia, China, ransomware groups are all investigating these other ways of getting into our infrastructure with all of these different companies that we already trust in our environment. Think, hey, in our environment right now, I'm sure we have Apple devices, we have Android devices, we have Microsoft, we have all of these different companies that provide technology for us because we can't build our own operating system, right, or our own computers or things to that effect. And so right now they're using that trust factor against us. I also built my own DeLorean time machine as a personal note. So it's almost done, and it's not actually hovering, by the way. That's just an effect, believe it or not. We still don't have hoverboards, which is unfortunate. But as a kid, I always wanted a DeLorean time machine, so I bought it, and I've been restoring a time machine there. Those are like little, they hook onto the tires, so it makes it look like it's hovering. So just a quick thing there. I also helped out the TV show Mr. Robot. So if you saw the TV show Mr. Robot with Rami Malek and Christian Slater, I did a lot of the skits and stunts that they did. They really tried to portray real hackers and kind of the hacker ethos in the actual TV show. And it's funny because I remember when I first started talking to Rami Malek and Christian Slater, they're like, hey, this whole hacker stuff's really freaking us out. Like, is there any way that you can like protect us against hackers, like a hacker shield? And I'm like, hey, it doesn't work like that. I'm sorry. Like, I can't like just be like, hey, you're good. You know, like everything's fine. So I helped out a lot with that. In fact, the last season of Mr. Robot, Elliot, who's the main actor, who's played by Rami Malek, he was trying to escape from a building and use my name on this TV show, which was kind of cool. So I need a little shout out there. I've also testified in front of Congress. I've been on the Katie Couric show, a number of others. I was also in a Chris Brown rap video, believe it or not. Yeah, never thought that would happen. I'm like a computer nerd, seriously. Like, I was like, hey, whatever. I had a bunch of dancers like doing backflips and stuff behind me, and I'm like literally like pretending to hack on a computer. I don't know what I'm doing here. Like, this is kind of interesting, but I'm in there. So fun times. So I'm going to show you a quick video here really quick, and this is the growing concern on cyber attacks, especially from a supply chain attack perspective. I'm not going to play the whole video, but to be aware, you know, the capabilities of our adversaries. And when I say adversaries, I'm talking about anybody that would want to do us harm from an attacker's perspective in our businesses, regardless of what industry vertical that we're in, is a growing concern because the capabilities of these attackers are increasing, right? And our traditional programs in IT and security are typically slower than the increase that we see from the sophistication of attackers. And so that's why you're seeing a lot of these data breaches occur, is that the innovation from these groups is outpacing what we can do from a defensive perspective against these groups. And the unfortunate issue is, geopolitically, that's not going to change from an offensive capability perspective in the United States anytime soon. Surprisingly, most of these attacks are coming from Russia. I know that's mind-blowing for everybody here because they totally say that they don't have any hackers there at all. But what's interesting about that is, you know, these groups that we go after, time and time again, you know, we can't extradite them from a law enforcement perspective. We work very closely with a number of different three-letter agencies. Most specifically, we do a lot of work with the FBI. We spend a lot of resources combating these groups. In fact, just recently, about 2.5 months ago, we spent about two and a half years unmasking one of the largest ransomware groups out there called Emotet. And we worked with Europol, the FBI, a number of others, and consecutive raids were launched, and we were able to snag all the ones that were in Russia and completely shut that operation down completely. Now, the issue is now we knocked out one of the largest ransomware groups out there. Lo and behold, 4 more took their spot. So, you know, it's just this whack-a-mole situation until we can fix politically, you know, going after these countries that harbor these types of groups, and that doesn't seem to be changing anytime soon. So I want to play this. And here we go.
All right, is the risk to corporate America greater than ever, and will the U.S. government retaliate against Russia? Our next guest is a former NSA and Marine Corps hacker who now helps the corporate world assess its cyber vulnerabilities. David Kennedy, our frequent guest, is CEO and founder of Trusted Sec, which has operations in 20 countries, and who's...
Just a really quick funny story about this really fast is that in the morning, it was really cold outside, okay? And my talk was at like 1 o'clock. And I had turned the fireplace on because I was freezing. And then I went and worked out. And then I changed, and I forgot I had kept the fireplace on. So it was like 1,000,000 degrees in my room. And so you could see like the sweat beating off of me. And I am definitely wearing gym shorts at this point in time. So I'm just going to throw that out there really quick.
His clients include 3 of the Fortune top 5 companies. David, welcome. Good to have you with us. I don't know exactly where to begin, but why don't I begin here? We hear and see on advertisements all the time about the cloud, the cloud, the cloud. It's coming, it's here, it's vital. But is it vulnerable?
That's what we're starting to see. When you start looking at the capabilities of these attackers, and it's not just what we see from a nation state perspective from Russia, China, Iran, North Korea. We're also seeing these with the ransomware groups that are out there too, where their capabilities are continuously increasing because they're making so much money. And a lot of the research is into cloud providers, or also what we call managed service providers. And the thing that keeps me up at night, that keeps me personally as a cybersecurity professional up at night, are these supply chain attacks, because it's not a one-to-one where it's hacking a JBS or a Colonial Pipeline from a ransomware perspective. You're talking about impacting thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of companies and organizations all around the world now from a single source or single hack. And so you look at the Russians, they've had a lot of success. Their early launch of this was NotPetya a number of years ago, where they targeted Ukrainian tax software. They then continued with SolarWinds, and now we're seeing them target managed service providers. Every other adversary that we have in the United States is also looking at this and saying, this is an area of opportunity. Cloud's definitely the next evolution of attack for us.
Are the major cloud companies, and I think of Alphabet, I think of Amazon, I think of Microsoft, are they the point of vulnerability, or are others who feed into the cloud sort of secondary contractors the vulnerability?
Unfortunately, right now, it's all of the above. We look at SolarWinds, right? SolarWinds, they had success because they hacked into Microsoft, Intel, VMware, Cisco. The technological backbone of our entire society, of how it operates today, was compromised from a third-party secondary company that happened to have access to their infrastructure. And unfortunately, this is how we've designed our security systems. We trust our third parties. We use things like Salesforce and Amazon for shipping goods and things of that effect. We bolt in other computer systems so that we can advance faster in technology versus developing it ourselves, which has worked well for us right now. But the models that we came up with around this weren't designed to handle the level of threats that we're seeing today from these adversaries. And
So, not to paint a bleak picture, we'll get into hey, what can we do to protect against this, right? It's not all doom and gloom. But what's interesting is that, again, our third parties that we trust, our security programs were never designed to handle those third parties being compromised. And that's a major concern for us right now. Again, it's what keeps me up at night. The second one that keeps me up at night is our deteriorated state of cyber warfare capabilities that has continuously, progressively gotten worse over the years. Our ability to go on the offense against these individuals has been deteriorated years after years after years. Cyber is still very much, I think, in the military side as kind of a taboo thing. Even though we have Cyber Command, we have the NSA, we have all these capabilities, the focus is still more on boots on ground and missiles and things of that effect than it is going after, offensively to these countries on a cyber warfare. I'm not saying that's 100%, but our capabilities have definitely dwindled over the years, unfortunately. And so we look at this and say, well, if you look at some studies, and so this is from Canalys, last year we had a record number of data breaches when it comes to amount of records, amount of data breaches that we saw, and this year we're surpassing that even more. So again, we're continuously seeing an elevation of data breaches in organizations and companies, and I'll talk about why that is. Now let's start getting into understanding ransomware. Ransomware is an interesting one. I was completely wrong on ransomware. I'll be the first one to admit. I was right on a lot of things, but ransomware I was totally wrong on. When ransomware first came out, it was really due to what we call the Carter market. Does anybody remember like Home Depot, Jimmy John's, Target? When you got your credit cards reissued, they felt like every month there was a different data breach in the credit card chains. Why haven't you had your credit card reissued recently? In a big data breach. Well, all of them were like, hey, we're tired of getting breached and having to reissue cards and all of these hundreds of millions of dollars we have to spend on fixing it and credit monitoring and everything else. We're going to switch to encryption on these point of sale systems. So when you scan your card or you insert your card from an EMV perspective, what's happening there is it's encrypting it at that device itself. And where the hackers were working at is injecting themselves somewhere in that network to steal all that credit card data. So when all these retailers switched to encryption, it shut down this entire market where they were profiting substantially off of a lot of credit cards that were being breached, big bulk heists of credit cards. So you had these fairly sophisticated programmers that were programming and licensing out software to go hack Target and Jimmy John and Home Depot's and everybody else. It was a licensing model. You one to many, so you have one sophisticated hacker that can create code, and you have less sophisticated hackers that know how to hack into computer systems, and then they just deploy that code, and then it's a licensing model. You get a certain percentage of that as you go through. And so that whole market went completely crumbling. And then so we saw these groups that were creating this code for the credit card market switch towards ransomware. Now, the early stages of ransomware were really non-sophisticated. They were a pretty low bar. They were targeting individuals. They were targeting homes, their pictures, things to that effect. They might get a local church or something to that effect, really small businesses. And the mistake that I made when predicting, hey, ransomware is just going to be a fad, which is obviously was totally wrong, is that they would continuously invest in their own infrastructure, their people, their capabilities, and make it a business. And that's exactly what they've done. They've invested in their infrastructure. They've invested in people. These are full-fledged businesses. Some of these organizations are 60, 70 people strong, and their whole purpose is going after organizations and making money. In fact, some of them, 10% of their proceeds go to charity that they hack into companies from and the ransoms that get paid. They have PR departments. It's insane, right? Some of them have way better customer service than you're used to from your cable provider. You get a hold of them anytime. They're really awesome. They're nice. They're nice people. Like, we understand we're stealing your money. You still got to pay it, but we'll help you, you know? And what's interesting about these groups is that, you know, the capabilities of these groups continue to expand because they're investing the money that is getting paid back into them. You know, I'm sure they're taking a lot of that and driving Maseratis and Bugattis. There's one individual that runs one of the largest ransomware groups. His name was Ryuk. Drives Maseratis and Bugattis, had a $5 million wedding in Russia. He's living the life off of ransomware, which is great. Estimated total revenue from that group, I think, is around $420 million. So some good money being made there. One of the other largest groups out there is Conti, and has a lot of ties to Ryuk. These all groups are all named differently. Conti is one of the largest ones out there. Conti actually sends out personal security advice to companies. Like, hey, if you don't want to be hacked by us, here's the top 5 things you should do. They're being nice, right? You're like, hey, it's your own fault if you get hacked by us because you're not following our 5 steps of protecting against us. And so, you know, it's crazy. But if you notice, some of these have like little X's on them, right? Like little line throughs. What does that mean? Does that mean they got busted and they're gone? No, it means that they rebranded and they went to a different name. So in most cases, we're not taking these folks down. It's very rare for these groups to actually go down. Interesting enough, does everybody remember the whole Colonial Pipeline hack that happened recently, right? Shut down gas and oil. People are out with like bags and like trying to do oil. Horrible, right? Crazy. What's interesting about that hack is that they didn't actually hack the pipeline. So why did we not have gas? Well, the systems were so intertwined from their billing system perspective that they didn't know how to bill, whether it was diesel, gas, or something else that were in those pipes at the time. So it shut down their entire operations. They didn't actually hack the pipeline. They hacked the billing process for the pipeline, which shut down the entire production in the United States, their enterprise infrastructure. They're so intertwined, right? Now, what's interesting is, if anybody remembers the name of that group, it's called DarkSide. Anybody familiar with that? Ever heard that in the news, DarkSide? Well, interesting enough, there was an offensive launch against DarkSide, and if you look at how fast it happened and what they were able to do, they're actually able to recover some of the Bitcoin that was paid from them. That is a very, I'm just going to rephrase that, it's the first time that's ever happened. That's very unusual. And if you look at the data that happened around that specific period of time, they already had access to whoever the DarkSide author or authors were, to their infrastructure. They were monitoring them. And this is very common from a law enforcement perspective, where they try to infiltrate the groups and figure out who's paying, who's buying, so they can kind of map out that network and figure out who they are, and eventually hopefully go after them again if they're not in Russia, right? And so what's interesting is they already had access to them, so they're able to recover some of that, and they shut down DarkSide. Well, about a month later, well, first of all, DarkSide surrendered and said, you know what? I'm done. I'm not going to come and hack anybody anymore. I learned my lesson. You know, I'm not going to hack Colonial Pipeline or anything again. A month later, a new group called Black Matter came out with the exact same code, the exact same ransomware service. They just rebranded as Dark Matter. So he's back, or they are back as individuals. So these groups pop up, come up, and come down as things go along, but they make a lot of money. Unfortunately, we deal with ransomware cases all the time, and it's just that, you know, these are victims being hacked by these groups, and the capabilities of them are continuously increasing. So we see these new types of attacks coming on. As you can see on the side, Black Matter strikes. Iowa Farmers Cooperative demands $5.9 million in ransom. Now, the issue that we're seeing with ransomware groups is the evolution has changed just from destruction to other methods. So instead of just going into your infrastructure and hacking your entire company and then shutting everything down and trying to get access to your backups and shutting those backups down, they also now steal your data and hold that for ransom. And they also hit you with what we call denial of service, which shuts your operations down. So it's all this chaos. It's what we call a trifecta type of attack that comes all at the same time to kind of shut you down as things are happening, to make you pay that ransom, to remove the pain from your business and organization in order to recover. Here's some of the tips from Conti, by the way. They're like, hey, if you don't want to be hacked by us, just do these, simple steps here. Implement better email filtering policies. Implement better password policies. Consider blocking some of these attacks like pass the hash. It's actually some really good tips, actually, to be honest with you. Most companies should be doing it. But really, these groups are all about the money. It is all about maximizing the amount of money. Are they working on behalf of a specific government? We don't know for sure, but we know that we literally hand them the person that's sitting in the chair in a place in Russia with all the data and evidence, and Russia is like, that's not here, sorry. Like, okay, got it. Interesting enough, there was a playbook recently leaked by Conti. There was a disgruntled employee inside of Conti. Believe it or not, ransomware groups have disgruntled employees. And leaked how they hack into corporations. And again, mind-blowing, all of the documents and wording were in Russian. It's crazy, but not here. Anyways, so we deal with all of these different areas on the ransomware side, and we have to worry about that. Now, I'm not saying nation states aren't a problem as well. From a global perspective, and what other countries are doing is a very scary thing. Most of us in organizations are not in the vertical or purview of nation states. Most nation states don't care about most companies unless you're in certain industry verticals, unless you're in aerospace, military, things like that. I understand the nation states are definitely in your bag of area that you want to worry about. But what's interesting is I want to bring up China for a second. China we've known for years is big on the intellectual property theft side of the house, right? What can we steal from the United States from an innovation perspective that can boost our economy and grow our economy, especially from a technology progression, military research, intelligence gathering purposes, medical research, et cetera, anything that can advance the economy there. What's interesting, though, is a few months ago, there was a really big cyber attack called Hafnium. And it didn't make as much news as I thought it would be because it was really the first of its kind that has ever happened from China before. There was a security researcher that found a bug in Microsoft Exchange. If you're not familiar with Exchange, it's an email delivery system. You can send emails back and forth to people. So if you didn't use Office 365 and you had your own on-premise Exchange infrastructure, you were vulnerable to this attack. It literally was a key to your Exchange servers, and then basically from there, the rest of your infrastructure and network. Now, what's interesting is Microsoft got wind that this was a bug 2 months prior to them actually patching it. And it was actively being exploited by China 2 days after it was disclosed to Microsoft somehow. So between the time it was disclosed to Microsoft, it somehow got leaked to the Chinese, and the Chinese started using it for their typical things that they do: intelligence gathering, intellectual property theft, high-end targets, things to that effect. But the crazy part about it is, and that's not the crazy stuff, that happens all the time. The crazy part about it was as soon as they got wind that Microsoft was patching it that following week, they started hacking everybody. Everybody. Anybody that had Exchange was getting hacked by China. And there is no reason for that to happen. There's no military preparedness. There's no intelligence gathering. There's no reason for that other than China saying, we're not scared of the United States and their cyber capabilities. And that was the first of its kind statement that we've seen from China saying, we're not scared of the United States, its cyber capabilities, and we're the top dogs in the cyberspace right now. So there's a lot happening on that side right now that's concerning, and there's a lot of aggression happening from Russia, from China, from Iran, from North Korea. North Korea, they're kind of like the big kids at the table, I guess, or little kids at the table, I should say. They do have capabilities, but they're more so trying to keep the lights on, make money for the regime, that type of stuff. Iran is much more formalized. They're getting much better every single year. But even like third world countries can buy capabilities. Saudi Arabia, for example, hacked into Jeff Bezos's phone because they bought a exploit that could hack into any iPhone for a few $1 million, and they could hack into any iPhone they wanted to, survey reporters that were against the Saudi Arabian government. Anybody can buy and weaponize tools from anybody that's producing it in all of these different countries. So every country has cyber warfare capabilities. So what I want to cover is how do these attacks work? Now, the biggest issue that we face right now is that one person can be an entire downfall of an entire organization. And what I mean by that is think of your network or your computers, your enterprise, your business as this castle. Now, with bring your own device and cloud and everything else, I'd argue we just have like one big massive city and people like patrolling the streets because it's just like no more castle anymore. But the analogy kind of still holds true. So think of us as we try to protect our data, right, as much as we possibly can. Now, what happens if a user gets phished or they go on a website and they download something that they shouldn't because someone was targeting them? Well, they're inside that castle now, aren't they? They're inside those walls. They have access to those systems. And when it starts to become a problem is when they go undetected for a long period of time. The first 30 minutes, probably not a big deal. Bob in sales gets compromised, not the entire downfall of your organization, right? It sucks for Bob. We got to reimage Bob's computer. It's a little bit of an inconvenience. But if that hacker has more than a day, a week, months in your infrastructure, They're learning your network, especially from a ransomware perspective. We had one adversary, ransomware group, targeting an organization, had learned their infrastructure over a month and a half, got into their ERP system, about 98% of their entire infrastructure, including their backups. Encrypted everything all at once. Just nothing you can do. You got to either pay the ransom or you rebuild from scratch. So, the more time that attackers have in your infrastructure, the larger the damage is to that castle, right? And so that's the problem that we're facing right now, is that the techniques of the attackers are designed to get around the technologies that we put in place, so that if a user clicks on something, they now can spread and move what we call laterally across all of these different systems to impact all of the other systems in your infrastructure. They bridge over to another workstation, another laptop, until they get Mary in IT, and then Mary in IT now can communicate over to our servers, and now we have access to your servers, now we have access to your databases and your intellectual property, and by the way, we're hitting cloud now. So all of these things are now coming together in a sense where we have to be able to build defensible positions against these types of attacks. And that's the complexity that we run into in cybersecurity right now. So I'd like to do a demo. I know it's probably the worst time to ask that because everybody's freaking out right now. But would anybody like to come up on stage? And I promise you, it will not be anything embarrassing. It's not going to be anything that is negative anyway. It's me going to be looking at, hey, what can I find about you online very quickly? And in full disclosure, it will probably be your full social security number, your date of birth, where you live. I'll leave the financial stuff out of it. I can do that too if you want me to. All right, we got one. All right. Ma'am, if you want to come up, please. Thanks. Everybody give a round of applause. Come on. If you can stand right there. I can't show you my screen as I'm doing it, so, because I might have other people's information. So is that your name on the name tag here? So Tammy, right? Tammy? Okay. Tammy Hoffman. Is Tammy your full name? No. Okay. Tamra? Making it easy for me. That's a good name. Like when you get like Bat Smith, you're like, shoot. Tamarh? A-R-A. Thank you. All right. Okay, I found you here, I think. Did you live in Texas? No. Okay, that's not you then. Here, hang on. Do you live in Ohio? Yes. Okay. What's your social security number? Just kidding. No, just kidding. Melrose Lane? No. Okay. I'm looking. It's more of a common name than I thought here. We'll get it. Groveport? Okay. Man, there's a lot more Tamaras than I thought here. Footville, Richmond? Okay. Hold on. Not in Columbus? Cleves, Ohio? No. Yeah, give me what city? Wooster. Okay, Wooster. I totally would never have guessed that. Okay, thank you. All right, I gotcha. Okay, thank you. That helped out a lot. And I'm just basically just putting the information in so I can show her what I've been able to find. So far, so good. Wow, that's surprising. No, just kidding. Yeah. And, okay, got that. Mechanicsburg. There was one time I was doing one at CNBC across an audience of like 5,000 people, and I called somebody up on stage, and she was Russian. I'm like, oh, this isn't going to work. And it's in front of like 5,000 people, and it actually worked. I was like, oh my gosh, I got it. That was awesome. And last thing here, and I'll be ready to show you. One sec. Okay, you can come here. So is that your age?
Close enough.
Phone number?
Yes.
Full social?
Yes.
Date of birth?
Yes.
All your addresses. So.
Oh, wow.
I also got some Jerome.
This is from right after college.
Oh yeah, there's hey, some good times there, right?
Yeah.
A lot of drinking. Some relatives.
Yep, every one of them. And you need to know he's got like 16 of blood relatives listed here, and their ages and whether they're alive or not.
Thank you very much. Everybody give a hand. Thanks, Sam. I'm kind of bummed I had to actually find the city that I'm in. I'm a little bit disappointed that I had to say it was Wooster. A little embarrassed. I'm actually just going to get off stage. But no. So, public information around individuals are obviously things that we hold true, especially our social security number. But if I told you, hey, social security numbers are actually one of the easiest things for me to get, and it was never designed to be a method for you to have any type of security whatsoever from a government perspective. It kind of changes your thought patterns of that, doesn't it? But when you can start tying to individual net worth, individual value, that's when it starts to become a problem. So we start seeing targeted attacks against CEOs, executives, things like that. You can start to build kind of a dossier around an individual, and then start to target that. We had a high net worth individual recently that he got on a plane to California from Cleveland, and when he landed, his phone stopped working. Like he didn't have any cell reception or anything. He's like, that's weird. Gets to his hotel, still not working. Calls up Verizon. Verizon's like, sir, you ported your phone number over to T-Mobile about 7 hours ago. We don't understand. Well, the hackers had access to his inbox, and they saw that his calendar, that he was flying at, Delta from here to here during this period of time. So they, had access to his email, were able to challenge based on having a social security number. Social security numbers are the easiest to get. We're able to change his account and port his account over to T-Mobile. And then from there, what is our phones used for on banks? Second factor of authentication, right? Get that little text message, right? So transfer all of his money out of his bank account, and then within a 7-hour period between flights. So they're getting good at what they do in a lot of cases, right? Yeah, it's a lot crazy. So I want to talk to you about some of the common ways that we see these attacks happen and what we can do to protect against it, because I obviously talked about what's happening out there now. The biggest threat to enterprise right now is users. Now, it doesn't mean that's 100% the case with Colonial Pipeline. Colonial Pipeline had a backup VPN concentrator. Everybody familiar with what VPNs are? You VPN into an environment, right? Well, the Colonial Pipeline forgot about one of their VPN concentrators, and it had the same credentials as somebody that had already been compromised before. So they just logged in, and they didn't have what we call multi-factor authentication. Now, 70% of small to medium-sized businesses, that's actually like 78% of small to medium-sized businesses do not have multi-factor authentication enabled. Now, what multi-factor authentication is probably the #1 most important thing that you can enable in your business period today. If you don't have it, I'd really, really, really recommend it. It's a way of getting a second form of authentication to your phone. So whether that's a text message, where everybody seen that when you log into your bank and it sends you a text message and says, hey, your one-time PIN is this, and you log in, or Amazon or anything else, right? Put that on all your stuff. Put it on your social media sites, put that on your bank, put that on anything you possibly can. All of them support it. And why that's important to understand is that if they don't have access, if they get access to your password somehow, which I'm sure nobody here is using the same password in any other location, right? Nah? I know Chris is. But listen, what'll happen in a lot of these cases is, everybody has apps that they download, right? We all love apps. We have TikTok, we have Instagram, we have Twitter, Facebook. Most of us here have Facebook, probably not Instagram, but including me. I'm not a big TikTok guy. But anyways, when you look at how this happens, we have all these apps, these websites that we register for. We do all this stuff, right? And then one of those gets compromised or hacked, and that email address is associated with the password that they're able to extract. And then they have all these tools that automatically try logging in with that same email address and that same password against all of your other sites. So if you're using the same password in one location as the next, that's when these breaches happen. And that's what happened with Colonial Pipeline. Colonial Pipeline had an individual employee that their credentials got compromised. And then from there, they were able to use that password to log into that concentrator, and then from there, cause all the damage that we saw with Colonial Pipeline. One employee's password was the entire downfall of an entire organization's enterprise. So multi-factor authentication can really help with that. right? You should have that on your VPN. You should have it on your Office 365. You should have it deployed across your enterprise, across you personally. It's not that big of an inconvenience. Most of them now, the way that it works is once you actually authorize your device, you go through that one-time password process, it trusts that device from there on out, so you don't have to do it every single time. So there are ways of making it easier on your workforce, but that has a big difference. But passwords, common passwords, I'm sure no one has Browns 2021, exclamation point, because you're like really crafty. You know, or you instead of the O in the Browns, you put a 0, which we totally don't think about as hackers. You know, common passwords like this are ones that we guess as attackers all the time. And again, as soon as we have that one foothold into your organization, it's a big deal. Phishing and targeted emails are also a big one. What we're seeing right now is less of the Nigerian print schemes with misspellings and more so targeting 5 people in your organization that they've actually done research on and come up with something that looks believable in order for them to get you to click it. And those targeted attacks are devastating, right? Because it looks believable in some way, shape, or form. And that's why education awareness is really important. That's why a lot of other things are important around your enterprise to try to protect this. But trying to stop phishing is really a problem in organizations. One employee, again, can be the entire downfall of your organization. So some things that we can do. This is personal, but also applies in life, in business. Multi-factor authentication is one, not using the same password in other locations. Staying up to date with the latest patches. Interesting enough, does anybody here have an iPhone? Oh, wait for this demo. No, I'm just kidding. Just teasing. With iPhones, what was interesting is they released 15.0.1 a few weeks ago. Everybody remember that? Right? And then the next day, they released 15.0.2. That's so weird. Like, why would Apple release one version and then release another one on our day? Isn't that a big burden on us as individuals, right? Well, these are to fix major issues, and there was a bug in 15.0.1 that would allow any hacker direct access to your phone, your text messages, your phone calls, everything else about it, your passwords, everything. It's what we call remote code execution. So they had to quickly address that and patch it so that you couldn't hack those phones anymore. So staying up to date is really important. I'll give you some additional tips too. You know, keeping your personal information out there, which we'll get to. Some password tips. Use sentences. Did you know that you can use sentences in your passwords? Like for your Windows passwords, for your banking passwords, unless your bank's like super old using mainframes, which some of them still do, believe it or not. Well, there are mainframes there, but I'm talking from a user authentication perspective. Your wireless passwords can be passphrases. Social media can be passphrases, sentences. I was walking down the street and it was awesome, exclamation point with spaces in it is an extremely complex password. It will take around 700 years computationally because it's a 39-character password to actually go and crack. 39-character password is really difficult with today's technological advances. It still takes hundreds and hundreds of years to crack a long character password tag. Guess how long a 12-character password takes to crack? On average, 17 seconds. Okay? So 12 characters, 17 seconds. Think about that. However, 18-character password, how long would you guess? 27 years. That little bit of a difference makes a huge difference in the complexity of actually cracking those passwords. Sentences can make a big difference in everything that you do, okay? I am a huge fan of password managers. The first question I get asked whenever I introduce password managers is, what if my password manager gets hacked, right? In my 23 or 24 years of security, I've never seen one person's individualized password manager ever been hacked and used as a way to go after anybody else. I'll put that in perspective. Now, what password managers do, and I personally use LastPass, but they're all great. 1Password's great, Dashlane fine, Bitwarden's no issues with any of those. I've actually reverse engineered and figured how they all work by myself just in my personal time. It's like what nerds do, like at night when their kids are sleeping. But LastPass, you know, like as an example, you have an app on your phone and you have an app, you know, on your computer, and it syncs all of that up. Now, the thing to note about that is that all of your passwords are stored in what we call Advanced Encryption Standard, or AES, which is military-grade encryption, which in today's computational space, until we get to quantum stuff, which is going to render all encryption completely useless, is that we basically look at it and say, we can't crack it in today's computational standards. So your passwords are contained in these really complex encrypted algorithms that no one can crack. And even the providers for this can't get into it. So if you forget your password or your passphrase, right, it's gone. You're going to lose it. So make sure you remember your password. And then it can generate random passwords for all the sites you go to. So I don't know any of my passwords for any of my apps, any of the websites I log into. They're randomly generated by my password manager, and the only password that I remember is from my specific password manager vault. And that has become easy for me. It'll automatically fill it in for your app. They're super simple to use. And again, in order for me to actually have to compromise your password vault, I would somehow have to get access to that passphrase, okay? So think about that. The only way that I could actually get to that passphrase is, one, if I could read your mind, right? And I'm not David Copperfield. The second thing that I could potentially do, though, is hack your computer. But if I've hacked your computer, I already have access to all of your passwords, your keystrokes, everything that you're doing on a daily basis regardless. So it's, at that point in time, you're much better having a password vault than not. A website that I'd recommend, there's a website out there called haveibeenpwned.com. Believe me, it's a legit site. I know it sounds crazy. But it's run by a guy over at Microsoft named Troy Hunt. And he focuses on understanding data breaches that are happening out there and if your personal information's in there. It's a free service. You can sign up for regular notifications. You can sign up from a corporate perspective if any of your users get compromised. And it'll check to see, have you been involved in any previous data breaches before? And it'll tell you where it was and what type of information was taken. It's great, because then if new ones happen, it'll send you notifications as things like that are happening as well. Some things to be careful of here, and I'll open up for questions in just a second. You know, when you get phished, a lot of times they're trying to create some sense of urgency. Hey, your HR benefits are going to expire by tomorrow unless you click on this link. Well, think about that for a second. Is HR really going to send you an email? You might have a really horrible HR team, I don't know. But is HR, that would make sense, that I'd probably click that link. But most HR teams are not going to be like, hey, you need to do this tomorrow. We're going to cut you off of your health benefits, and your kids are going to, not be able to go to their doctor and get their medicine. So, think about the urgency aspect of this. And this is what you should focus on in training your employees, is that, if it's coming from an internal communication, it's extremely important to understand that these types of things aren't going to happen right away. You're going to see some forward message coming from it. Check who it's coming from itself. Educate your users on what to expect out there. I was the chief security officer for Diebold for a number of years out of North Canton. And we had an entirely dedicated program to education awareness of all of our employees. Whenever we would see a new phishing campaign, our employees knew where to report it to, how to report it. Even if it wasn't suspicious, we weren't going to be like, oh my gosh, I can't believe you reported that. Like, that's such a noob thing, like a newbie thing. No, we were very helpful with them, saying, hey, this is legit, you're good, go over here. And we'd also send out those notifications to the entire company saying, hey, here's a phishing campaign against our entire population. This is what it looks like. Here's the things that you can do to spot this in the future. Education of our employees is so important right now, along with the technological controls to be able to supplement the attacks that we're seeing from these attackers. I'll tell you, the companies that we go into that can defend against these types of attacks are companies that have good education awareness programs, by far. I'd rather have, if you have 10,000 employees, I'd rather have 10,000 sensors than 50 technological sensors in place. Employees become a huge asset for you. And I'm not saying they need to be security professionals. They're not going to be on Mr. Robot hacking into computers. But to have an understanding around what's possible and how you can protect your organization becomes extremely important. And that's some of the main areas there. I'll make sure that everybody has access to these slides. There's some great stuff on there. If you're interested in teaching your kids cybersecurity too, there's a really great resource called safeandsecureonline.org. I teach the technological badge at Boy Scouts for that, and it's a great reference as Garfield. So if you have any younger kids, they want to learn cybersecurity, it's a great resource online. But there's a lot of good stuff up here to kind of protect yourself, your businesses, et cetera, that we put out there for everybody. But with that, I'd love to open up for some questions. Thanks. And thanks, Tammy. Appreciate it. Thank you. Got a question back here? Oh, we're going to. Advances in quantum computing. It's a good question. Quantum computing is going to be an interesting one. There's a whole field around quantum computing, quantum cryptography. It's really going to change, I think, how we do computing in the future. The issue is that it's extremely complex, right? So to get that into a practical sense into businesses and corporations is one thing, but the warfare side of the house is what has me mostly concerned, right? China, I think, had, it was like 3 years ago, had a successful launch of quantum cryptography, actual encrypted communications that they were able to beam through for the very first time. United States is researching that. So it is going to have large-scale implications. I just don't know how long it's going to take. It could be 20 years, it could be 50 years, it could be 100 years. Google's pressing very hard on quantum computing. It's pretty much going to be, I think, a major game changer, I think, in what we know today, in how fast our computers can operate, how fast we can calculate things. It's going to blow lids off everything. It literally would render all cryptography today pretty much useless, or it can be. I think we have Mike. Thanks, Dan.
You mentioned that the U.S. cyber offensive capabilities are lacking, or we haven't put the resources in. And this is a country that has the top technology companies. Why is that? Why have we not kept up to pace, if you will?
Yeah, when you look at Russia, I would say our capabilities are on par with Russia. Okay, we're in a pure competitive space with Russia. The issue that you run into with China is that their entire country is unified 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 100 years ahead of us, right? They're looking 100 years forward, whereas we're looking at our next political cycle in 2 years. And so, it's very difficult to implement major change, especially from a cyber warfare perspective, when, and I will say that the defense of our country as becoming a much better topic. You have CISA, the Critical Infrastructure Security Agency, which is tasked with protecting our infrastructure. Jen and Chris and those guys are really good over there that do a great job. They're working on defending our critical infrastructure. That doesn't apply much to our business side of the house, unfortunately. But from an offensive cyber capability, it's literally all politics. We had a major problem a few years ago. There was a big leak called the Shadow Brokers leak. And Russia somehow got access to all of our exploits and what the NSA uses to conduct their operations worldwide. It was one of the most largest intelligence leaks that we've ever had. And the NSA never owned it, but it was the NSA's code. It's what they call the Equation Group, is the name for the handle for the NSA. And long story short, there was a contractor that was working for the NSA that would bring all of the work home, which happened to be all of our secrets that we use to conduct offensive operations across the world. Things that are just like straight up James Bond stuff, right? Can literally open up any computer you want to and never get detected. And that contractor had a piece of antivirus software called Kaspersky on there, which happened to be written out of Russia, surprisingly. It's weird. And then all of those secrets that were on that computer got leaked to the Russian intelligence agency, and then they used that for a while, and then they eventually leaked it publicly, which destroyed a large percentage of our offensive capabilities. But at the same time, those tools and techniques, which cost hundreds of millions of dollars to build and to test and to deploy and to operationalize, it hurt the capabilities of how they move forward even worse. So it caused a lot of process to be changed, a lot of ways that the technology is being used, so you can't conduct operations the way you used to be able to before. It's very much the same effect that happened with Edward Snowden. If you talk to any law enforcement agency that was pre and post Edward Snowden, the bureaucratic process you have to go through now from an intelligence perspective is insane. So it's these layers of us not being able to function as very specific groups, and Cyber Command was supposed to kind of fix that, but Cyber Command runs into issues because they'll train all these kids, and then they get out of the military and they're making six figures because there's such a huge shortage in, cybersecurity in the private sector that they can't keep people to even do Cyber Command. So it's a major issue that we have to tackle from a lot of different areas, and unfortunately it comes from our leaders, I think, on the top all the way down. And it's not one administration or other. It's been neglected for countless years. So.
Question here. What do you recommend to test systems for guarding against interference, fixes, or breaches in our elections?
So the election process is an interesting one. The elections, from a cyber intrusion perspective, is very difficult to do. It's very difficult to sway an election one way or another, just because our election process is so fragmented and different based on different counties and cities and everything else. Our decentralization and lack of centralization that we should have been doing for a long time actually kind of helps us in this situation, because everything's all over the place and there's different technology, and it's just you would literally have to have an army going after our election process to actually have any type of impact on it, because it's so bad. But it's so bad that it's actually kind of good for right now, if that makes any sense. If I were a hacker going after election system, I'd be like, I tap out, I'm done, I don't even know what to do here. But from an election integrity perspective, it's definitely something that CISA is tasked with, and CISA has done a lot of great work on working with all the various local, state, and federal agencies of coming together for standardization, protection, and enhancing and making it more resilient, closed network infrastructure versus connected ones. There are some communications they have to report back and stuff like that, but it's all heavily monitored and maintained. So there's a lot of good fronts happening on that. There's a long ways to go, And it's definitely something where we saw, obviously, in previous elections, Russia's interference in a lot of things. It becomes a major problem, right? And those are things that we need to be looking at from a defensive perspective. And CISA specifically, as an agency, is tasked with that, and they're doing a great job. They have, out of all the agencies that I have trust in, CISA is one of them, and they're doing a really great job on the defensive perspective of critical infrastructure. Long ways to go, but they're the right people to be listening to. They just recently broke down all the barriers between all the various different agencies to do collection sharing and sharing of what actors doing what and intelligence gathering and things like that. That was a huge win, and the ability to actually go after these organizations and shut them down. So a good example with Colonial Pipeline is that the Colonial Pipeline infrastructure that was used by DarkSide had been known for 6 months, which means that we knew that the hackers were offloading all this data to these locations, and they had this infrastructure for 6 months. Why couldn't we as a country shut that down 6 months ago? Remove that infrastructure, and they would have no ability to even do Colonial Pipeline, right? So they're getting more responsive and active, working with all of these different technological companies to try to be more proactive on the defensive side, which is really good.
Most of us today are concerned with the day-to-day business operations of our businesses. What would you say to this group here about the dangers to their business potentially against a ransomware attack? Do they realize what it is, what it can be? I mean, are we vulnerable here in this Midwestern rural area here?
Yeah, with ransomware, it's any industry vertical, it's any company of size. We've seen them going after larger and larger organizations. We saw Universal Health Systems recently breached, where they shut down their emergency rooms so they couldn't even take in patients. Acer Computers that manufactures computers, Garmin, if you have one of the wearable fitness trackers, if you noticed it was down for 2 days, that was actually because they had ransomware. It's happening all over the place, and they're going bigger and bigger and bolder, hitting a lot of different industry verticals. So we're all in this categorization from a threat actor's perspective of what we need to do from a defensive side around protecting against these attackers. So yes, we are all part of this group that needs to do a lot more when it comes to protecting against these types of things. And a lot of times, I'm not talking about, hey, you need to give a blood sample every time you log into your computer. A lot of these things are basic principles that we can implement in our environment that can really start to shut these attackers down. Like, hey, if Bob in sales doesn't have the ability to communicate to Mary in IT's computer, well, now you've shut down that avenue of attack that I could do, right? So some of this is technological, some of it's education awareness, some of it is all these things coming together to be successful. And that's what we see, thwarting most of these attacks and when people are able to respond much more effectively. But the last point I want to hit on that is that, our companies will have a drawbridge that we left open on accident or a window that doesn't have a guard. And it's the ability to say, well, that's going to happen because nothing's perfect in this world, right? We can never have a solution that's going to be 100% perfect. But if we can identify that hacker the first hour, the first day, we've saved our company, right? That's the response aspect of things. And that's where the security industry is really focused in on, is understanding how these hackers go after companies and what you can do to really boot them out early on so that it doesn't damage the rest of your business.
That was kind of a loaded question, Dave, because I'm president of a small company here, 60 employees, and we had a ransomware attack 2 years ago. They got into our firewall, and there was a compromised password, and we got hacked. And they demanded only 10 Bitcoins, which at that time was only $90,000.
Yeah.
Of course, then they wanted another 10 after they opened up 6 of the 8 servers that they had locked up that they encrypted. So I guess my point is, everybody here needs to know that it doesn't matter who you are or where you are. Yep. Potentially everybody's vulnerable to these ransomware attacks. This happened to us like 2 years ago. Yep. Our insurance company, fortunately we had cyber liability insurance, which, I guess I would recommend that, right? I'm not very technical, Dave, but I guess I would recommend that to everybody. They look into getting cyber liability insurance because it saved us a couple $100,000 basically.
The only thing that's changed on the cyber liability insurance front, and definitely advocate that in your policies, is that the policy insurers they're losing a ton of money on this because everybody's getting hacked, right? So there's a lot more stringent requirements of what you have to do to get those policies taken out. So you have to be proactive in your security program now, whereas before they would just sign off on whatever. you have to demonstrate that you have a working cybersecurity program, that you're doing risk assessments, you're doing other things across the board, before they'll actually apply that policy to you. So there are things that you have to do to get that cyber liability insurance, but absolutely agree there. I mean, the thing that's beneficial with a cyber insurance policy is that, you get a negotiator, you get, a crisis advisor, you get incident response individuals. There are some benefits to having cyber liability insurance in place, and obviously the policy piece of them actually paying the ransoms. But again, you have to be doing a lot of things ahead of time before you can go to that route.
Our tech guys were tempted to click on the link.
All right. Thank you.
I guess our time's up.
Thank you all very much. Appreciate it. I'll go back.
Back up here.
I'll come back and talk to you.
Thank you so much. We will now be taking a brief 5-minute break.
Good afternoon. So there's a bit of a family reunion going on here today. Many of you probably know that there used to be a fantastic small company in Worcester called Technographics. And there are a number of Technographics alumni here today, including our next speaker, Ms. Maisha Lutzy. Now, I'm a cynical person. I have to admit, anytime someone says that our company is like a small family or a large family, I roll my eyes. And in the back of my head, I always put the word dysfunctional in front of family. I think 90% of the time I'm pretty spot on. But Technographics was the real deal. Technographics was a crazy, fast-growing, fast-paced, chaotic, exhausting company to work for. We were always punching way above our weight class. And honestly and frankly, it was a whole hell of a lot of fun. But a company like that doesn't survive, let alone succeed, unless you have a family culture. We were a company where we were all in it together, and we all celebrated each other's wins, and we all forgave each other our faults. And like any family, we all had our roles. Embarrassingly, I think mine was the cocky, know-it-all teenager. I was insufferable, and I don't know why they put up with me. But as I reflect about Maisha Lutzy's time at Technographics, I have to come to the conclusion that she was a single mom working 3 jobs to make sure that her kids never went without what they needed, and never really knew how close we were to homelessness at times. She was a single mom working 3 jobs and pursuing her master's degree using an accelerated learning program at that time. Maisha Lutzy is simply one of the hardest working people I've ever met. She was always one of the first people in the office, and she was almost always the last person out the door, and only then to pick up her cell phone and continue responding to emails throughout the night. I swore I wasn't going to need my cheater sheet, but then I looked up and I saw all your faces. I have to tell you, as an InfoSec person, following Dave Kennedy is a nightmare. I do not like this. It's all right, Dave. So Maisha was incredibly successful in what she did because she worked so hard. And there was a common saying around the office, which was that whatever Maisha touched turned to gold. And it was meant as a compliment, obviously, at the time. It was high praise. But as I reflected on it, it occurred to me just how unintentionally insulting that was to Maisha. Because nothing ever came easy. Nothing was ever handed to her. And all of her considerable accomplishments were all hard-won. And to say that it just turned to gold is really ignoring all of those hard-won victories. But thanks in large part to Maisha's efforts, Technographics did grow to be a very successful company. And in 2010, a company based out of Arlington, Virginia, named CACI, acquired the company. And when our CEO, Mr. DeVidia, a gentleman that despite having not worked for him for, I think, 13 years now, I still consider him to be my boss, and I think I will always consider him to be my boss. But DeVidia gathered the employees at Technographics, I believe in this very building, to announce the acquisition of the company. And one of the things he said to us all was that by selling Technographics to a large player like CACI, he was giving us all a larger stage to perform and grow on. And I have to believe that a large part of that statement was aimed at Maisha Lutzy. For everyone who knew Maisha knew that she was destined for great things, and we all kind of wondered at her undying commitment to Technographics because we knew she could do so much more. So when Dee called me and asked me if I would come to Worcester today and introduce Maisha Lutzy, one of the things he said to me was, "Hey Jason, did you know that Maisha is now a president at CACI in charge of a group worth over $1 billion?" And honestly, I had no idea. I hadn't talked to Meisha in about a decade. But the first thing I thought was, of course she is. Of course she is. I would expect absolutely nothing less. Meisha was set on a stage, and of course she stole the spotlight. It's what she does. But it doesn't happen because things just magically turn to gold for her. It happened, if you'll forgive me ripping off Hamilton, it happened because she's a self-starter, she works a lot harder, and she's a whole lot smarter. So enough of my gushing, and on with the show. It's my privilege to introduce Meisha Lutzi.
Okay, I honestly thought I was going to come up here and say, I can't believe I'm following David Kennedy, and I apologize to all of you that I'm not quite as dynamic as he is, but honestly, I am kind of blown away and humbled by Jason Nestor's words just now, so it's going to take me a minute to gain my composure. So good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for, again, the fantastic introduction. Really means a lot to me. I'm sorry, now I'm emotional. I'm going to try and get through this thing. So I have a long history with technographics, obviously. I have a long history here with this community, actually. Not born and raised here, but spent quite a few years here. And I thank you all for the opportunity to come here and talk to you today. Not only is it just an opportunity to kind of address everybody and talk to everybody about my story, but it was also a great opportunity for me to hug some folks that I haven't seen in 10 years. And I'm super hopeful that I've just not created for myself a super spreader event by all the hugging that I had to do today, because I couldn't resist all of them, right? So it's been fantastic. Thank you for having me here. Like Jason Nestor just said, it's interesting. I worked for D for 15 years. I have not worked for D for 11 years. I've accomplished quite a bit in the last 11 years since CACI acquired Technographics. I haven't come back to this place in over a decade. I haven't interacted with most folks in over a decade. But when I got the text message from D that said, "Are you available? I need something," I was like, done. My boss just called. I gotta go. So I told my husband, I was like, just so you know, I'm gonna be gone on these dates because D needs me. So I gotta go. So he still holds an incredible amount of power over all of us, which quite frankly is a testament, I think, to what I'm going to be talking about today, which is how you go from an Inc. 500 to a Fortune 500. And it's all going to be it's all foundationally about culture, and the culture that's created inside of your organization, which promotes that growth. So let me find my clicker here. So what I thought I'd start with is just a little bit about me. So I don't have nearly the fun facts that David had. I've never been in a rap video. I've never been on CNN. I don't think I have quite those credentials against me, but here's my story. So I joined Technographics in 1995, and I was its 10th employee when I joined. And I joined in Fort Collins, Colorado, which is where the company at that time was largely based. Although we were headquartered here in Dee and Mary's I think dining room table was the headquarters, right? I actually started in Fort Collins, Colorado. Started as a geospatial technician, and the beauty of working for a small business, the beauty of working for a business of all of 10 employees or 20 employees, is that you get noticed. You get noticed when you do a bad job, but you also get noticed when you do a good job. Your contributions can't help but be noticed because there's nothing that kind of covers what you do. And for me, luckily, I quite frankly am a hard worker, I'm a self-starter, I'm a self-motivator, and I was truly blessed that Dee noticed that. And throughout the years, I was given opportunities to be able to grow inside of the organization. And I felt incredibly humbled and proud to be part of the organization, especially at the tail end with things that I was being able to accomplish, and what we did when we sold our company to CACI, and being part of the process to find a company that had a cultural fit that would work for our organization, and being part of that process. And since then, since joining CACI, equally, I've had the opportunity to kind of prove that I have something to offer, I guess. And throughout CACI, I've been able to rise through the ranks, accomplishing this year my new position as President of Operations Support and Services, which is one of the 3 sectors within the company. So some fun facts about me. I'm originally from California. I moved to Colorado, Fort Collins, Colorado for school, and then started my career with Technographics. I moved here to Worcester, Ohio for an opportunity. Dee said, if you want the opportunity, do you come to Worcester, Ohio? I said, okay, let's go. And eventually found my way to Virginia after the acquisition of Technographics from CACI. So my goal in life is to have the bookend of growing up on the Pacific Ocean and dying at the Atlantic Ocean. So I'm hoping my view is it just kind of gets better as it goes. I don't have any kids. I'm not sure about the single mom thing, except that it felt like I was raising a whole bunch of people sometimes in a small, young company. I don't have any kids, but don't fret. I have an incredibly full house. I have a wonderful husband who I actually met and married while we were both employed with Technographics. I have 3 dogs, one of which I actually adopted here at the Worcester Humane Society. And some of you in the audience, if you live in Worcester and you lived in Worcester about 12 years ago, probably found him many times because he would get out and he would wander around. And my fantastic executive assistant, Misty Fry, at the time would get random phone calls from random people throughout Worcester saying, we found Meisha's dog. In fact, he ended up at the Worcester Glass Company a couple of times. So he just liked to roam around Worcester. And now he's in Virginia with me. So 3 dogs, I have 8 chickens. I have no idea how that happened, but I'm a proud parent of 8 chickens, young enough that they're not giving me eggs yet, but I can't wait. And then I have a grandmother that lives with me as well. So it's incredibly full house, full of a ton of energy and a ton of excitement. So again, no rap videos, but pretty full life anyway. So what I'm here to talk about today is going from an Inc. 500 to a Fortune 500 company. And I thought the best way that I could do that was just kind of tell you about this adventure through my eyes, through my lenses, right? And really this was and has been a fantastic journey. The journey has had ups and downs. We've had contracts wins. We've had contract losses. We've been able to hire significant quantities of people. And unfortunately, throughout the years, I've had to lay off significant quantities of people. There's been the ups and downs of the competitive landscape. Sometimes you're always diving to the bottom in order to just stay afloat. And sometimes you're able to ride a wave that allows you to accomplish amazing things at levels that make sense and have great returns. So it's been an incredible journey. And it all started here in Wayne County, right, with Dee Vidia purchasing a portion of a company called Johnson Controls. Funny enough, I still have the paperwork of that particular deal, which is an incredible story. I'll tell it wrong. But as I understand it, found this division of a company in Fort Collins, Colorado, offered them pennies on the dollar for what they were asking for. They said yes, and then asked them to go ahead and fund that whole process as well, if I remember correctly. So a hell of a deal was brokered that particular day. So the company was small. When I was hired in 1995, there were 10 of us, or I was employee number 10 at the time. I think our sales at the time were maybe $2 million. I didn't know at the time, so maybe even less than that. And the predominance of what we did was created digital maps. So if you all know about Technographics and who we were and what we were, apologize if this is going to be a little bit repeat for you. But that's what we did. We created digital maps. And one of the things that we knew we wanted to do was grow. And I think what Dee kind of fostered in all of us with his leadership style was just that entire zest for growth. How do we grow? How do we become what we want to become? How do I empower everybody in this company to have an impact with what we're trying to do and where we're trying to go? And how do I make everybody be an equal partner in this so we all feel like we have a vested interest towards our success? When we started, we created these digital maps. We didn't have tools, right, that we were selling. We didn't have technology that we were selling. We didn't have products that we were selling. So there wasn't anything special, I'll say, about what we were providing, it was digital data, which at the time was really hard to explain to people. And then the advent of GPS came in, and you just explain to people when you type in, the coordinates of where you want to go to, and the GPS tells you where you're supposed to go. That map in the background, right? That's what we did. So thank God for GPS, because it made that conversation a lot easier. So because we didn't have anything special, right? No actual secret sauce that we were selling. We had to think about, how do we differentiate ourselves? How do we want to be known sort of in the industry? How did we want our customers to understand who we were? What did we think was important to us? And at the end of the day, it all came down to what I call exquisite data, exquisite quality, being the best that we could be, driving the best product that we could drive, right? Creating the best data sets that we could create for our customers. And then creating an environment in which they trusted inherently the work that we were giving them, building up a reputation so that they wanted to come to us and work with us in the future. When we started, like I said, we were small. We didn't really think about competition. Today, I feel like 90% of my focus is on competition and what they're doing and what they're trying to do and how I can skirt around that, how I can be better, et cetera. At the time, we didn't think about competition. There was no such thing as competition. We were so small, there was plenty of room for us to grow. So we didn't have to worry about anybody else. We just had to worry about ourselves. And that sort of internal focus, I think, changed how we approached what we did, how we approached how we grew, and how we approached kind of the culture of what we moved forward with. 9/11, for just about everybody in the world, certainly everybody in the US, was an absolute pivotal moment for our company. After 9/11, our customers required the data that we were generating at a volume that was magnificently greater than what they'd ever needed before, right? The ability to map the world, understanding sort of what things looked like, understanding where your mountain ranges were, where your cities were, where your transportation networks were, how you were going to get from point A to point B, became absolutely critical, and just they had a voracious need for the data that we were creating. And so, of course, we stepped up, right? And we increased the volume that we were producing. We increased everything that we were doing without compromising the quality of the data that we were delivering. So, interestingly enough, despite the fact that we were small, and most of our work was actually done for third parties. So we didn't work for the government directly in most cases. We actually worked for a sort of a third-party broker, if you will. We were a subcontractor in most cases. The government, for some reason, got to sit in our spaces. And they would come to our facility, and they would sit side by side with our technicians, and they would QC, quality control, the work that we were performing on the fly. And it was this fantastic opportunity. And again, I don't think that we were smart enough at the time to know it was an opportunity. It was just inherent in sort of who we were. But it was a fantastic opportunity for our customers not only to see and witness sort of the data that we were producing and give us live feedback and tell us how we could be better, but it was their opportunity to actually get to know us as individuals, as creators of the data, to see that it was actually important to us to understand who we were, to see us show up every day at work with the same level of energy, the same level of commitment to the information that we were trying to generate. And I think that helped shape in their minds the fact that they wanted to work with us even more moving forward. So in 2003, this large 10-year multi-award opportunity came up. And we didn't even think about priming it. We didn't think that we would stand a chance to have a seat at that particular table, right? We just planned to be everybody's sub and do the best work that we could for everybody else and let everybody else kind of have the limelight, and we would be the wind beneath their wings, if you will. And this chance encounter with these customers that came in said, why wouldn't you at least try? Because we think you might be better than they are. And so what's the harm in putting something out? So of course, D calls and says, we're doing it. And countless hours later, I'm putting a proposal together and putting something in. Lo and behold, we get awarded one of those contracts. It was an absolute pivotal moment for this company. It changed the course of what we could do and how we could exist sort of in our world moving forward. It absolutely opened the door for growth potential that honestly was not on our radar at the time that we had won this thing. Fast forward 13 years when that contract actually ended, despite the fact that we were the smallest, in fact, again, our sales were, let's say, $2 to $5 million. The next largest was $32 million a year in sales, and the next largest was $5 billion a year in sales, right? So that's the magnitude of kind of these companies that won seats at this table. Despite the fact that we were the smallest, when we got through this contract in 2013, we were actually generating more work than anybody else. We'd actually just swept the table in terms of task orders and requirements and being able to execute the work that this particular customer required of us. And again, all of that comes to sort of the heart and soul of what we were trying to be, which is just the best that we could be in that environment, deliver the best data that we could deliver in that environment, be the most responsive to what our customers needed. So it was just a fantastic opportunity, a great opportunity for us to take advantage of, and the catalyst that I think got us from 2 million to 60 million in the 15 years that I was with the organization anyway. So it's a brilliant, in my opinion, a brilliant story. But centered in all of that is sort of the culture that I talked about. So for us, as a small company, who was able to kind of hire who we needed when we needed them. Literally the only requirement to get a job with Technographics back then was you could not have a fear of computers, which back then some people did, and you had to be willing to sit on your butt for 8 hours a day and stare at a computer screen, which you'll never believe the number of persons who wanted to hike every day and still kind of have a job with us. That didn't work out so well. But you couldn't be afraid of computers, and you had to be willing to sit there and do the job. Everything else we brought to the table. We gave you the training, we gave you the tools, we created the processes, we created the procedures. We could train anybody to do the job as long as they had those just 2 solid core foundational elements. And what that meant was we could hire who we needed to hire. We could hire people who were innovative, people who were thoughtful, people who met sort of the cultural aspects of who we were trying to be and what we were trying to be. I wasn't limited to hiring people with master's degrees in certain fields with certain requirements in order to be able to do the job. If you had a master's degree, great. But all it took was you to be able to have kind of that cultural fit. And we believed that was going to be the thing that would kind of push us forward. So we found ourselves with a great team of young, innovative, hungry, excited professionals who were in it to do the best job that they could and kind of take this company to the next level. What is crazy is I'm 26 years, right, is how long I've been, I say, with this company. 15 years with 15 years with Technographics, 11 years with CACI. The gentleman who hired me, who provided me my initial training and my first 3 years of sort of mentorship, just celebrated his 35th year anniversary with the company. So I think the culture that we created and that desire and that place where you could innovate and become who you wanted to become is still pervasive today. I mean, it created a long-lasting effect. I can't tell you how many resumes I get right now that are multiple pages because it's 6 months at one job and 2 years at another job and then 3 years at another job and then 6 more months back at the original job again. There's a tremendous amount of job hopping. I am sure that is helpful in some fields, but in this field, I'm proud to say that we have a lot of longevity in the folks that we were able to hire. So if you look at the sort of the stuff on the left-hand side of the screen, depending on which way you're facing. It all comes down to sort of these words, right? So culture, in my opinion, is your brand. Culture is who you are. Culture is the heart of what you do. Culture allows your employees to understand the why of the mission that they're executing. It allows them to understand the why of why they join your company, what your company means, and what they mean to your company. So culture is just incredibly important in everything. And so as I go through this list and I thought about what allowed us to be the most successful, these are the words that really resonated for me. The first, of course, is integrity. And I can't speak about this enough. Being honest with who you are, being honest with what you're doing, being honest in your interactions, being truthful and transparent with customers, if you're going to be on time, if you're going to be late, right? All of that is just absolutely critical. So integrity to me is always number one. It's always been number one. And interestingly enough, even with CACI, the number one word that our employees use to describe our company is integrity. It's one of the first things that they pop up when they say, what do you think about when you think about CACI? Reputation is the second one. And I kind of talked about this a little bit, but having a solid reputation, having the reputation of a company that your customers can actually come to, having the reputation that when somebody calls, you're going to answer, having the reputation that you provide good quality work, having all of that just allows you to actually grow in an organization and with an organization in a way that you won't otherwise have. We all know, right? We all know that there are certain contractors that you won't call, certain people that you won't call because their reputation is just horrific, right? And so you just don't choose to do business with them. So reputation for me is absolutely critical. Agility and responsiveness. So responding to our customers when our customers had needs was critical. When we were smaller, this was a lot easier. We were more agile. If the customer needed us to work somewhere else, do something else, accommodate a change in schedule, done, check, signed, sealed, delivered, you got it. I would walk out of my office door, I would tell everybody what we were doing, and we would change directions. Large companies, in fact today, right, with CACI, I have a harder time doing that, because now I have contracts and I have terms and conditions and I have scope creep and I have other things that kind of happen. But when you're young and nimble, when you're small and nimble, it's a fantastic asset to have. Excellence in quality and performance. I talked about this, right? The quality of the data absolutely matters. The quality of the service that you provide, to me, absolutely matters. Having a reputation of doing a great job matters. You guys don't rehire somebody who does a shoddy job in your home, right, or on your lawn, or in your personal life. You go to a store and you get really bad customer service, you don't go back. To me, it's the same in standard industry, in the industry that we are, in the industry of national defense. It is absolutely the same way. And then there's the entrepreneurial spirit. Which is probably something more than anything that like emulated out of D every single day that I got to work with him. Constantly looking for different, innovative, and new ways of attacking problems and processes, thinking about ways that we could change how we work, thinking about new industries that we could tap into. His mind goes to places that I don't fully understand all the time, but that entrepreneurial spirit is contagious. You just want to be part of it. You want to create something that's better and different and unique and new. And as we all know, you can't be in the same business forever, right? Business changes, processes change. The speed with which you need to execute your requirements changes. The expectations of you increase, right? Time and time again. And you have to morph and change in order to be able to accomplish that. So that entrepreneurial spirit is absolutely vital in terms of growth and in growing you to that Inc. 500 and eventually Fortune 500. And I'm truly proud to say that not only did we get to $60 million a year in revenue, which was a huge feat, but we also had 450 employees that were worldwide. And that too for us, going from employee number 10 to then having 450 employees worldwide was an absolute amazing feat that we were able to accomplish. Now, there were a lot of, like I said, there were a lot of sort of dips in the road, if you will, bumps in the road that we had to get through. That initial growth, that initial first surge of growth, I remember when we grew to, I think, our first 100 employees, super duper painful. We made so many mistakes. First off, we were hiring tons of people all at once, and we forgot the cultural fit. So now we had a bunch of people who didn't really believe in what we believed in and didn't really want to be there in the first place. So now I'm filled with, employee issues that I didn't have originally. Thinking about the care and feeding of them, thinking about schedules, thinking about shifts, all of these things were things that we hadn't necessarily prepared for, which created some bumps in that particular road. Once we got past that hurdle, though, and realized where we were weak, we established our processes, we established our procedures, we established the new SOPs that we needed to follow, and the second 100, and the third 100, and the fourth 100, and the international operations went off without a hitch, right? We did not experience those same initial issues because we learned our lesson and we applied them forward. So culture, to me, is absolutely vital, but the other thing that's vital is understanding what your path forward is. So if culture is sort of the heart of the organization, then where you're going and how you kind of set the conditions for success for your employees is kind of the brain of the organization. So it's not just everybody's innovative. That's interesting, right? But what are you innovating to do? What are you trying to become? So for us, there's kind of 3 areas that we look at. And now when I say us, I'm more referring to CACI. There's 3 areas that we really drive home with every single employee within the company. And there's 3 areas that basically allow us to grow. The first is winning new business. And that seems like a no-brainer, right? In order for you to grow, you have to win new business. The second is when you've won that new business, you actually have to execute it flawlessly. You have to drive operational excellence. Be on time, have high quality work, make sure that you're being responsive, all the things that you need to do to hit those requirements. And then the last for us is flexible capital deployment. So let me just kind of explain that bottom bar first. So when I think about growing, when I think about innovating, when I think about how we're going to change as an organization, I usually set my sights on something. And then I think about how do I acquire the skills, the capability, the technology that I need to get me where I'm going. And there's 3 things that you can do. The first is build it internally. So that means you got to find the people with the skills, figure out the time to be able to build internally what that new tool or application or product is that you're looking to generate. The second is partner. So if I'm looking at a niche capability and I only need a small piece of it, perhaps the better solution for me is partnering with another company that has this and we can partner together, have a unique offering, go to market, and then together we're a fantastic solution for our customers. And then the third is acquisition, right? So looking for a company that I can acquire to fill that gap, to create that new niche, to create that new opportunity for myself. And all 3 of those come with a different return on investment calculation. So you do your return on investment calculation and you decide which of those 3 you kind of need to do. That's sort of where the flexible capital deployment comes into play for CACI. So for us, it's absolutely critical that we have enough cash on hand that we can invest in our own R&D or indirect kinds of investments to improve our processes, that we can buy other companies when we're looking to buy them in a rapid sort of fashion, or that we are unique enough in the marketplace that we're somebody that people look to actually partner with. So these 3 things, this winning business, driving operational excellence, and flexible capital deployment becomes the 3 core elements to ultimately to growth for the company, to growth for the organization. So one of the things that I always think about is, again, from a win new business perspective, from a growth perspective, how do we do that? What does that look like? I used to like to draw like an infinite Z curve. And if you think about it, the way I think about it anyway, is when you have that reputation, when you've garnered a solid reputation and created goodwill with a customer because you execute flawlessly, then you have the opportunity for them to take risk on you in areas that you don't typically perform. So the work that we did, for example, at Technographics for NGA on the last day of execution was so vastly different than the work that we did on day one, because we had garnered the reputation and the goodwill to allow them to take risk that we could do more than what they knew us for. So you take what you do for a current customer and continue to expand that so that you expand the capabilities, the products, the services that you're offering to that customer. Then you look at this capability that you've created and this goodwill that you've created and this solid reputation that you've created, and you take that the next level down, and you find another customer with a similar need that you might be able to sell to. So now I have a new customer that I can go to with a tried and true capability. They can go to my old customer and ask for a reference, right? And then hopefully I can win work with a new customer in a new area with something that's tangentially similar. So if I go back to the Technographics example, we were creating digital maps for the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency, so we're creating maps around the world. So then we looked at, okay, well, does the US Geologic Survey need maps? Well, they do. Does the National Oceanic Atmospheric Agency need maps? They do. FEMA needs maps. The banking industry, by the way, needs maps because we all are assessed whether or not we have to buy flood insurance based on maps that are stored in a system that says whether or not you're in a 5-year, 10-year, 100-year flood zone. Apparently, I'm always in a flood zone, by the way. Really not sure how that happens if I live on top of a hill, but I pay my dues. So finding other customers that have sort of tangential needs allows you to then expand your portfolio. Again, this constant, in my opinion, sort of infinite Z curve that allows you to take what you do for a customer, expand it, find a new customer, start all over again, find a new customer, start all over again. And you take all of that combined, and you find yourself on a Fortune 500 list because you've taken what you do and you've expanded it to a level that's just beyond what you're currently doing today. So it's kind of a lily pad effect. That's how I think of it. That's how I go after new business. Then you take the entrepreneurial spirit, and you maybe tack on a little something, something extra. So then we started to say, if I can create digital maps, what else might a customer need? Like, how do you actually interact with that map? What do you do with that map? What do you do with the information? What do you actually need from the information? Can I make it better for you? Can I make it smarter? Can I sell you a technology that allows you to interact with that better? So now I'm out of just the services industry, providing people to provide exquisite services. And now I'm in the technology area. Now I'm sending you a tool or a device for you to do your job a little bit differently, a little bit better, perhaps a little bit faster. So there's all of these lily pad opportunities if you think about things in a slightly different field. And I mentioned that Dee's mind works a little bit different, certainly than mine did. But he created, I think it was his brainchild anyway, created a tool called Parcel Finder. And the intent of that was you're in a city, right, and you want to find information about a parcel. Now this is all, secondhand nature to everybody in this room, right? But back then it was like, woohoo! There you go, Mary. But we created this thing called a Parcel Finder to help you find information about parcels in a city or a town, right? So then Dee has this thought process, or somebody had a thought process in our company that said, well, what is a cemetery if not a town, right? A parcel map in a microcosm. So now we go from creating this Parcel Finder to help you find information on a parcel to creating Plot Finder to help you find a plot to be buried in the future, or lots of people go to cemeteries, they look for their family, and it was an automated way for you to find that information. Super weird for me to go from the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency and mapping mountains in Afghanistan and then getting into the cemetery business. But that's how you have to think. That's what gets you to the Inc. 500, and that's what gets you to the Fortune 500, is never being stuck in what you do today, but always thinking about how you can take that to what you can do tomorrow. So for CACI, when we were acquired in 2010, and in a quick, hopefully funny story, because I have no idea how long I've been on stage now, at some point in time, Dee offered me the opportunity to run our international business, and I was elated. And I have this policy for myself, which is you say yes to every opportunity, and then you be transparent about what you need to be able to be successful in that opportunity. Everybody is promoted to failure, right? We're all promoted to a level where we stop being successful. And personally, I believe that some of that is because we fail to ask for the assistance that we need to be successful in that position. Typically, you are promoted because you are doing a fantastic job in the job that you do today, with the aspiration that you can do a great job tomorrow, but no knowledge that you can do it tomorrow. And things that you do today don't necessarily scale up to what you're going to be asked to do tomorrow. So I'm incredibly transparent when I'm offered an opportunity about what I need to know. And in this case, I told Dee, I'm happy to take the opportunity, but I don't know anything about international operations, international labor law, international accounting, and quite frankly, despite living in California for as long as I did, I wasn't very culturally educated. So I found this program Purdue offered. It was an MBA program through Purdue. It was an international program. 5 different universities from across the globe supplied persons. It did everything that I wanted it to do. I got the international operations. I got to know people across the globe. I understood how to do work with them. I understood how to interact with them. Everything was down pat. And then every time we went into the financial review of a publicly traded company, I would tune out 100%. Because I was part of a privately held company, and it didn't matter to me. And then in 2010, we were acquired by a publicly traded company, and I thought, holy crap, I missed an opportunity of understanding how this thing is actually going to work. But what's interesting about a publicly traded company is the number of stakeholders that you have are totally different. Right now, you have a whole bunch of strangers called shareholders who are basically assessing whether or not you're a good company or not. And for them to assess that, you have to be able to describe who you are in a way that actually makes sense to them. So in the first several years that I was with CACI, that was actually really hard for us. So we're in the national defense industry. Most of what we do, we can't talk about. Most of what we do can scare the bejesus out of you, like David Kennedy tried to do earlier for all of us. Most of what we do, it doesn't translate to everybody across the nation all the time. So the question was, how do we talk about ourselves in a way that actually will resonate with the street, with shareholders, with everybody else? So this quad is something that we ended up coming up with, and it basically divides the customers that we're supporting into 2 pieces, enterprise and mission. So enterprise, think of as back office. So every organization across the globe, right, requires IT equipment, has payroll, has accounting practices, has invoicing. That's your enterprise need. Those are needs that you have no matter who you are, where you work, or how you work. Then there's the mission side, which is actually executing the mission of your customer, which might be totally different. So if I go back to my National Geospatial Intelligence Agency example, again, there's IT systems, cybersecurity, all sorts of equipment that they have to manage, payroll, facilities, et cetera. That's the enterprise side of them that they need, that everybody needs. Their mission is geospatial data. So when we were executing our requirement, we were executing the mission side of NGA, not the enterprise side. And then we talk about ourselves in terms of expertise and technology. So expertise is people. It's finding the right people with the right skills to do the job that we're being asked to do. In the enterprise world, it's a little easier to find. They come fresh out of college this way. There's lots of courses that you can take. On the mission side, it's a little bit more difficult. So if I'm supporting a special operations group, I actually have to have special operators who understand how to perform that mission in order to be able to do that job. It's a much more nuanced category. And then technology gets us to the tools and the products that we sell. So where this comes to play is one, our shareholders, our stakeholders, the street for this publicly traded company now understand the kinds of services that we're providing or the kinds of customers that we're supporting. And then if you look at those two, the way that we sell it is that expertise comes at slightly lower margins and technology comes at higher margins. So when we tell the street we're growing in enterprise technology or mission technology, the street automatically thinks your margins are growing. When we tell them we're growing in the expertise area, they think you're finding people that you need to find with the skills that you need to find, slightly less margins, but a little bit more labor intensive. And that allows them to formulate sort of an opinion. And again, their opinion matters, which is something I didn't understand in 2010. I could care less what a shareholder that I've never seen in my life thinks about us. But it turns out their opinion matters. And so now we're able to explain it in a way that makes them feel invested in our company without actually knowing all the secrets of how an NSA customer actually exists and works. So since joining CACI, we continue to be on a growth trajectory. So when I started, we were 3.1 billion. And you can see from these charts, we've continued to grow since then. Our employee growth has grown, our revenue has grown, our net income has grown accordingly. And interestingly enough, we can all learn lessons, right? So there's a lovely little bow in our growth trajectory there. And the lovely bow is actually a point in time in our history where we found that we were over-reliant on a particular kind of work. So again, CACI concentrates largely in national defense. The timeline that you actually see there was the first time that we got out of Afghanistan, and it was sequestration. And we had so many people that were supporting that particular mission that when the government cut that down by roughly 50% at the time, it wiped out a good chunk of our overall organization, and it created the dip that we had, which created the fire in our belly to diversify so that we would never be so reliant on any one area of work again. So it goes back to that quad chart of thinking about how do we think about ourselves differently. It goes back to those growth imperatives, looking outside the box. It goes back to that entrepreneurial spirit of finding different ways and different customers and different things that we can do so we are diverse enough that we don't find ourselves in this position again. So I think at the time, a total of 10% or 20% of CACI's portfolio was based on a particular mission, and today, in the same quantities, it only represents about 1%. So it's incredibly important if we're going to continue to grow and have the growth trajectory that we need to stay on that Fortune 500 list. It's incredibly important that we continue to think about that in that matter. So finally, this is kind of where we are today. So I started with a $2 million company and the 10th employee. We were acquired and they were $3 billion. I can't remember what the population was. Now we're $6 billion and 23,000 employees with 150 locations worldwide. And this year, we were on the Fortune 500. And I will tell you a small secret. I really hope that we're on the Fortune 500 next year. But there were a couple of Fortune 500 companies that dropped off the list this year, a couple that you might know. One is called, I think, Hilton Hotels. One is another large, maybe Marriott hotel chain. So perhaps COVID and the restriction of people traveling and booking hotels kind of got a couple of long-standing Fortune 500 companies off the list and offered a great opportunity for CACI to be on that list. I certainly look forward to us being on that list forever. But it's an incredible journey, and I guess what I want everybody to take away is that it doesn't matter if you're starting with a fire in your belly to grow to something bigger than you are today. You keep that fire, right, whether you're part of a $3 billion corporation or a $2 million privately held organization. You keep that fire in your belly no matter what your portfolio looks like, because that's the only way that you're going to sustain that growth. And you surround yourself and you ensure that the people around you understand what motivates you, the culture that you have. Surround yourself with people who are looking forward to those same growth patterns, those same opportunities. growing is the key to opportunities for everybody in your employee group, right? People don't get promoted if you're not growing. You can't hire new people if you're not growing. You don't get to the new facility if you're not growing. So growing at the end of the day, growth is just the foundation to be able to have a happy, healthy, in my opinion, workforce. So I'm incredibly proud of where we are. I'm incredibly proud of how we got here. I humbly and holistically believe that culture is a foundational element of this, and then you couple that culture with very clear imperatives that everybody can get their head around, have the right path trajectory, give people the opportunity to innovate, give them the opportunity to be part of where your company is going, and there is no stop and no limit to what it can do. So with that, I'll turn it over to Chad.
Dee, you're a stickler for time. Do we have time for some questions? Yeah, okay, good. Do we have any questions from the audience here? Samara? No? Yes?
I had a question regarding how do you screen candidates to identify the cultural fit, and then also how do you onboard to that?
Yeah, that's a great question. In fact, from an onboarding perspective, a couple of years ago in our quest to be more efficient, more effective, and more automated, we actually put everything online. And then we did some surveys and we realized that nobody felt like they were part of CACI anymore. Like nobody. They were part of the customer, but they weren't part of us. So we absolutely changed that and went back to an old school, inefficient way of greeting people, meeting people, having them come to our facility in many cases, and actually doing that in-person onboarding. So for me, onboarding, that personal touch, doesn't matter if they're here. I mean, I can have a Zoom call with somebody, right, and still have that personal touch. But I think the personal touch is absolutely critical. From a screening perspective, I think it's all about the conversation. So many people, especially in my organization, 23,000 employees, it's really easy to hire people off of their resumes. It's really easy to kind of feel like you're just too fast. But I think it's the conversation that you have, the questions about what they've done, the looking for that kind of that spirit. There's just no way to not have that as part of your overall process. It is tough, though. I was staggered to learn. So we hire something like 5,000 employees a year. We definitely have turnover. We hire about 5,000 employees a year. And I learned that only, I think, 30% of those employees actually come to us from applying to an application that's online. Everything else is this robust recruiting staff who's just scouring LinkedIn, that's scouring the local communities, that's scouring, colleges, that's looking for people that look like they have the fits that we're looking for. So it's a tremendous amount of energy that goes into that.
Aisha, when you started with Technographics, you were there through a season of exponential growth. I mean, 11x. That's incredibly hard. There's a lot of business owners here that have not seen that type of growth. There's some that have. Can you point to any attributes that you can think of that through that time that helped sustain you through that exponential growth?
Yeah, so I think there was this clear drive not to fail. Like failure was just not an option. That sounds almost trite, but it wasn't an option. So I talked about this stumbling block that we had when we hired when we got to our first 100. I mean, the number of employee concerns, the number of employee comments. People didn't like the coffee anymore, and they didn't like their station, and they didn't like their keyboard, and they didn't like their mouse, and then it was a nightmare, right? And then we tried to create first and second shift because we didn't have a space that was big enough. So one of the things I would say is the need grew ahead of our financial capacity to really expand, right? So we didn't collect the cash before we needed more computers. We didn't collect the cash before we needed more employees. We're always paid in arrears, right? Everybody is paid. You do the job, and then you get paid for the job. So that was really hard, and we had to do 2 shifts to kind of maximize the space that we have, maximize the stations that we had. We didn't think too hard about how to do the second shift. What's good, what's sustainable, what do people do in your office at midnight? right? Versus what do they do at 11 a.m. when managers are kind of roaming the halls. So we didn't have the right infrastructure in place. And it didn't take long. It only took about a month for us to figure out that we had done something wrong, and then start to correct it, and then start to create those SOPs, have different interaction. I love interaction. I love to talk to employees. I love to greet them. I hate when I walk the halls and I have no idea who anybody is, because I've done so much hiring that I don't know if you're my employee, or you somebody else's employee, are you a spouse? Like, I have no idea. So that personal interaction, you can't achieve it one-on-one, but you can achieve it in a forum like this, right? Having all hands meetings, having ways in which you actually reach out and touch the employees. So I would say, again, perseverance and sort of a not willing to fail. But not willing to fail doesn't mean you're so stubborn that it's your way or the highway, right? Not ready to fail, not willing to fail means you listen to the inputs, you make the logical change, and then you push forward.
I think of entrepreneurship, and I think entrepreneurship will oftentimes get you onto that Inc. 500, that Inc. 5000, right? And then you see large companies in the Fortune 500 realm. I oftentimes think of them as being bloated cruise ships, full of people, money, slow to turn, not innovative, and that's when the companies like Technographics come in and take some of that market share.
Yeah.
What was that like for you, moving from Technographics to being acquired by CACI, and that whole cultural shift?
Yeah, I would say the first 2 years of my time with CACI were absolute hell. I went from being a member, a trusted advisor to the CEO of an organization, to a cog in the wheel. And I think for me personally, right, it was a personal, it felt like I had taken a step down, right? It felt like I was demoted. It didn't feel like I was part of an organization that I had been part of. And it took me about 2 years to figure out my self-motivation, my self-worth, and how I was going to fit into this organization, and how I was going to make sure that CACI was as successful as I helped Technographics to be. So it took me a minute to figure out my voice, my worth, my value, and how I was going to impart that within CACI. And it took all of us kind of, it's a shock, right? It's a shock to go to a large organization. And then I had to learn what the heck a publicly traded company actually means. I had to learn how we're valued versus how we were valued as a privately held company. And understanding that then helped me to understand the motivations of the choices that we were making. Why it took so long for this, aircraft carrier to actually turn and do the right thing. So it was hard, but at the end of the day, what I remember when we were going through this acquisition process and CACI was sort of wooing Technographics, right, and we were deciding who to go to, it was the personal contacts. It was Tom Mutrin, who was the CFO. It was Paul Cafone, who was the CEO of this $3 billion company, coming to talk to us at $60 million a year. It was Bill Farrell, who was the president of this organization. And it was their words and their stories and their thoughts that got us to join the company in the first place. And then, like I said, for me personally, it just took a minute for me to figure out how I actually flourish in that environment.
Well, you've been an amazing speaker, amazing success story, and I can just say as a local Worcester native here, it's really neat to see a success story like Technographics start from nothing, be acquired by a big corporation. A lot of local pride in that. So thank you for taking the trip back over here today.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to start off with a complaint. And that complaint is you open the bar and then you send an Irishman up to talk. So thanks very much, Samira. Yeah. No wonder no one's coming to listen to me. Okay. So, but in all seriousness, in typical chamber fashion, we want to keep things rolling here. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce our next guest. So our next speaker is president of Amcor Rigid Packaging Business. It's a $3 billion business based in Ann Arbor, Michigan. And he's member of the company's global management team. Amcor Rigid Packaging, or ARP, are the world's largest supplier of plastic PET, and we've got loads of samples up here that he's going to do a show and tell for, PET containers and closures for the food, beverage, pharmaceutical, wines and spirits, healthcare, home and personal care markets. So as president, he's responsible for all operations, sales, and research and development for the business, which spans 12 countries, 60 plants, and 6,000 employees. So under his leadership, ARP are focused on improving safety, profitable growth, sustainability, and recycling efforts, operational efficiency, and cash flow. So Amcor works with leading companies around the world to protect their products and the people who rely on them. So speaking from my own personal experience at Gojo, we've partnered with Amcor for several years. I've had the pleasure of visiting one of their manufacturing facilities and working with their R&D teams on multiple projects. So they do play a critical role in our supply chain, and that includes our operation here in Worcester. So prior to being named president of ARP in September 2018, he spent 12 years at Arconic in a variety of roles, including executive vice president and group president of engineering products and solutions, which is a $6 billion business focused on aerospace, defense, automotive, commercial management consulting, and commercial management. He also had time in the consulting firm McKinsey & Company and held engineering positions with Nordson Corporation and Schlumberger Limited. So he holds a master's degree in business administration from Case Western Reserve University and a bachelor's degree in aerospace and mechanical engineer from Princeton University. He also serves as vice chairman of the Processors Council for the Plastics Industry Association and leading U.S. Plastics Industry Trade Association. So the reason that Eric is here today, and he informed me before that he is a proud Ohio man, and his wife is State Senator Christina Rogner, and they have 3 daughters, and they live in Hudson, Ohio. So without any further ado, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to present to you our next speaker, Mr. Eric Rogner.
By the way, everybody, absolutely by far the best hand sanitizer in the world. We're very proud to have partnered with Gojo on this. And I can tell you, a year and a half ago, they doubled their volume. You want to have a supply chain disruption and try to meet customer needs and all that, try trying to double these when you have fixed capacity on it. We'll talk about that in a bit. Okay, how many people here really want a beer or something or really want a coffee? So you mentioned my wife, State Senator Christina Rogner. I was in an event with her about a week ago where she was talking, and the topic of this discussion came up. And I learned 2 things out of it. The first, she goes, well, what time are you on? And I go, I don't know, 3 in the afternoon. And she goes, well, everybody have eaten lunch. And I go, probably. She goes, okay, they're all going to fall asleep now. Right? You've been sitting, it's a little dark, you got the blood going to your stomach. So here was her advice for me to give to all of you. At about 10 or 15 minutes in, because I've got kind of a raspy, drony, and I'll go slow, kind of a voice. Here's the advice. If you actually think I'm interesting, but you're falling asleep anyway, go to the coffee. I don't care. Just get up if you want to do calisthenics. I have no problem with moving around. I did it for the first 2 hours. Go for it. On the other hand, be honest, and I'm honest, if about 10, 15 minutes in you're bored out of your skull, go to the bar. Hang out there. I won't take it personally. Go for it. Go for it. Thanks, Stephen. I appreciate that. By the way, my R&D guys now will revisit that PCR program we were talking about. No, seriously, the whole point of this is networking and having fun and trying to learn a few things. And so the second thing that came to me as I was talking to my wife, or listening to her actually, is what am I even going to tell you people? I mean, the odds are an hour from now, you might remember 3 things I say. You might remember I look a little bit like Bruce Willis and have a really shiny thing on my head from the lights. But if I were you, I would want to get a couple of nuggets that make sense. And so we're talking about what do you learn in life. And as I was thinking about this, I was in my wife, and some of you may know her and know she's very direct. She's very clear about her program. She's in politics now. Wasn't always. She was in business before. But she was on the stage saying, there's really only 3 things that matter: faith, family, and freedom. Now, she has some very clear policy objectives that she drives on those 3, and she takes a hell of a lot of bows and arrows for that. And kudos to her for doing that. In fact, sometimes people ask me who's the person I most admire in life, and it's her. So if you don't know her, you should look into that. But it dawned on me as she was saying that, You know, that's the same story that has helped our family and has helped me through business. So what I'm going to assert to you, when you come out of here, you'll see a really interesting story, and I'll try to do it in about 20 minutes. But the common three themes you're going to see about my life over the last 30 years is number one, faith. I am standing before you today, and every step I've taken in my career, even though some of them seemed really weird at the time and I wouldn't have expected it, is because I have faith in the Lord and I know He's going to take me where He wants me to go. If I have the ability to hear, the openness of heart, and the courage to take some of those steps, even if they seem really weird at the time. Number two is family. Look, whatever we do in life, whatever job you have now, even if it is a family type job, there are some things that are eternal, and family is eternal. And so what you do has to work with family. And so many of the lessons you'll learn by supporting family and whatever role you have in your family, you can take to business. I agree with an earlier speaker. I don't think companies are families per se. But the more you can find pockets in your organization with the people you work with directly or other pockets and treat people like family, good and bad in that, the better off you're going to be. And finally, freedom. What does freedom mean? Well, I'm not going to get into the political sense and all that of freedom, but I can tell you what freedom means to me in business. It means find those ideas, those people, the talent, the game changers, and you heard a lot of stories about them from our earlier speakers. And as leaders, because I think everybody in this room is a leader of some sort, I would argue that one of the most important jobs we have as leaders is give them the freedom to succeed, which oftentimes means, number one, make sure they have the resources they need. Sometimes the support up to the board or wherever you need to go. But more often than not, it means get the hell out of their way. And one of the things we've seen as you go into companies that are bigger and bigger, you'd be amazed how much bureaucracy we can layer on and how often we have an ability for all the best intentions to absolutely destroy and sap the life force right out of our employees. And people that are aggressive, that are creative, that are entrepreneurial at middle and lower levels of the organization, just say, why even bother? So you'll see a couple of examples of that. So that's what I want you to remember when I'm done. Faith, family, and freedom, and maybe a few props along the way. So I thought I'd start off with a couple of things for those that, and I'm actually going to come back to this page at the very end. You'll see my family. Wife and 3 daughters. We live in Hudson, Ohio, just amazingly blessed at the life that the Lord has given us. And the picture in the upper left is my favorite plant that's currently in my network. I got 62 plants around the world. They're in Denver, Colorado. And I want you to look at those 2 people behind me. Lisa on the left, she's been with us 42 years. She's the operations manager. And then Brian on the right. Brian is not her son. Brian is the plant manager, actually her boss now. But Lisa groomed him for 20 years and watched him and helped him through his whole career. Now he's her boss and the plant manager because she treats that entire plant like her family. And it is the best performing plant I've got, though it's small. Okay, let's go back in time. I'm a mechanical engineer. I'm sure there's many engineers in this room. Was absolutely sick of school, ran away, worked for Schlumberger as an oil field engineer. Ran around jungles and offshore in Latin America, Venezuela, Argentina. Did that for a few years, got it out of my system, downturn in the oil industry, came back to the US, went to Case Western to get my MBA. Absolutely great school, strongly support it, encourage anybody to go there. Was convinced that I was gonna go into manufacturing. And that, GE, something like that, here I am, an engineer, good manufacturing guy. And then out of the blue, one of the people that I was going to school with, who had a summer internship at McKinsey, because McKinsey didn't recruit at Case at the time, said, hey, Eric, I was a summer intern, and they said I can bring 2 names in for full-time interviewing. This is late in the cycle for anybody who interviews in college. It was already May. I'd already had my manufacturing job lined up. And they go, yeah, the office said, Eric, we like you. This is the other Eric, the guy who talked to me. But you can bring in 2 names. I wasn't thinking about it, about consulting, much less a place like McKinsey. But I'm like, yeah, sure. He goes, the only problem you've got is, he used a different word. He goes, you have rough edges. He used a very different word around that. However, I think you're smart. At least you're smart enough to try, so I put your name in. How the heck did that happen? Well, I'm going to tell you it's a God thing. And it was a God thing for a number of reasons. Not per se because of anything about McKinsey, although there were a lot of really good things about McKinsey that I did learn, and I'll mention 2 of them here. But because in doing that, it pushed me way out of my comfort zone. I learned a whole new set of skills, but I also met my wife there, who was at McKinsey. Back again, oftentimes you'll find that many of the facets of your life, that faith, that family, that freedom, can come together if you have an open mind and an open heart to it. So I did what everybody did when they joined a consulting firm. I figured I'd be there for 2 years, okay? Then I'll go get a real job, go back to GE, maybe at a higher level. I ended up staying for 12, which arguably was probably a little bit too long, but there were some good things that came out of it. I already mentioned the most significant being meeting my wife. But I did learn some very valuable lessons, and if there's one thing they beat into your brain at McKinsey, and I think this is a hugely valuable lesson for any organization, it's this: the team with the most good players wins. They hunt talent like nobody on earth hunts and develops talent. I saw it when I went through the process to get in. I still can't believe I did. I did it through my years as an associate, through my years as a partner. I have never, and this includes the iBanks like Goldman Sachs that I've worked with on deals and big transactions, I've never seen a company invest in talent like that organization. And that's why they are the preeminent consulting firm in the world. You cannot underinvest in finding, developing, and retaining the best talent. Those 3. You got to find it, you got to develop it, and you got to retain it. And I've tried to keep that mantra with me through my career. In some form for the general population of all my employees, including when I was running the EPS group at Arconic, where I had 28,000 employees. But definitely for the high potentials. And that's what I've translated into my manufacturing experience. At every level in the organization, from entry level, hires all the way up through the L2 suite, find those high potentials and do everything you can to develop and retain them. That was the first thing I learned coming out of McKinsey that I think is really useful. I'll give you a second one. Here's a fun tip, back to those high potentials. I was a project manager. And I had a guy who was a partner. Actually, he's now CEO at Albertsons. And I was working my ass off for this guy. And he seemed to have a pretty good life, and he was clearly on a growth trajectory. And I go, Vivek, why does it look like you're not doing anything and I'm working my ass off? And he goes, because you're working your ass off and I'm not doing anywhere near as much as you are. And I go, well, what the hell are you doing? He goes, well, I'm practicing being a partner. Okay, he wasn't a partner yet. So I'm spending all my time just schmoozing with all the executives here, and I'm trying to sell the next couple of projects. Okay, I know we're not supposed to be commercial at McKinsey, but honestly, every consulting firm is commercial. And he goes, well, how are you doing that? He goes, because I've got you doing my job for me. And the light went off. I go, so lesson number 1 here, you want the next job, just start doing it. And before long, you're going to get it. That lesson stuck with me through my entire career. Even in big companies, you start aiming high and you start helping out your bosses or your superiors, or you just create a new job and you start doing it, you'll be amazed before long you actually get it. If you wait for the promotion, as you heard, sometimes you're doing great in your current job and they're taking a bet on you on the next job. The more you can almost start doing the next job before you're there, the better off you are. Here's the second really practical tip I got from him. I go, well, how did you get me to do all that? And he smiled and he goes, because I don't give you what you want. I was like, well, what do you mean? He goes, well, listen, you're human and you like me to pat you on the head. He goes, if I gave you all of the praise that you wanted, you'd just be lazy and wouldn't do anything. He goes, on the flip side, if I didn't give you any praise at all, which is my bias, he said, then you'd just check out. So here's what I do. I figure out just how much praise you want, and I give you this much less. Because you come to work every day just hungry for me to give you a pat on the head. And I was like, oh, it hurts because it's true. Now, take that for the grain of salt and use it as you will, but I'll tell you what, that lesson has stuck with me a lot. People need praise, but they don't need overpraise. All right. What happened after McKinsey? I guess the third thing that I really learned at McKinsey is patience and diligence, network and relationships matter. I got a chance and an opportunity to work with Alcoa for 7 years while I was at McKinsey on and off on a whole bunch of different projects, and got to know a couple of the executives really well. I did what Vivek had taught me. I was always focused on let's just make money, let's make money, let's make money. And I had an opportunity to go run a business. They came and said, Eric, one of the group presidents there, we have a business, no one else inside of Alcoa wants it, it's underperforming. If we can't turn it around in 2 years, we're gonna sell it. We'll give you a shot. And I jumped at it. To actually get a P&L of a $600 million business, went in, thought I'll take all of these management tools and tricks and everything else that I learned, and I'll show them that, hey, it's actually applicable. And I got in. Good news is I stayed, and over the next 12 years, I just bounced around. Ended up running about 85% of what would be considered the downstream businesses of Alcoa. And I learned a few things along the way, and I thought I'd talk to you about them here. But first, you're probably wondering, what is up with this chart? I thought he worked for Arconic or Alcoa, and what's this Howmet thing? Worth a bit of context. When I joined Alcoa, they were a $30 billion company, and I was running one business and one part of 4 groups. The crash hit in 08 and 09. They cut themselves in half and became a $17 billion company. Went from 120,000 employees down to 45,000, but they survived. They were the only integrated aluminum company, and they do more than that made it through. Actually, that probably killed them, because a couple of years later, the Elliott Management Group came in, kicked out the CEO, replaced a third of the board, changed the name to Arconic, and started a process that gutted the company, and then split it then yet again when I got a headhunter call later, and I'll talk about that when I go to my next step. But through this all, I did learn something, a couple things that are really important. Number one, know what your core value added is. What is it that you can do better than anybody else? And make sure you double down on it and you nurture it. And for all the sleepiness and noise you may ever have heard about Alcoa, Arconic, or Howmet in the aerospace, defense, and all this industry, what they loved, and there were people that loved it, was innovation in material science, particularly big, heavy metal. And when I say that, I should actually say light performance metals, because they didn't do much steel. They did titanium, they did aluminum, and stuff like that. Now, off of that basis, you got to keep your eyes open. And sometimes you make bets that take a long time to pay off. And sometimes it's weird networks. So the first one up there, the F-150, I think some of you know that magnets don't stick to it because it's got an all-aluminum structure. 10 years before Ford decided to do this, it was a couple of engineers in Alcoa's Technology Center that figured out that if you're going to mass produce aluminum in an assembly line on all those rivets, very easy to rivet steel, they're pretty strong weld joints. Aluminum is terrible on that. You would need to supplement it with a bond. So you put the two panels together, you treat it, you bond it, and then you rivet it, and then you can meet the strength and requirement. They developed it, they patented it, and could not, for the life of them, get Ford, GM, Chrysler, or anybody else to take this into mass production. Until Alan Mulally became the CEO of Ford, who had been at Boeing, and had a 25-year history with Alcoa that had solved a bazillion metallurgical problems for them. And one of the first things he did was called the head of R&D at Alcoa and said, what can you do to get aluminum meaningfully in here? And Ray Kilmer at the time goes, glad you asked. Here it is. And thus was born the aluminum F-150. And to this day, Alcoa, which is now Arconic, has 50% of all the aluminum on every F-150 and then gets royalties on the other 50%. Those couple of engineers, in a bet that they made 10 years before, created what is worth $2 to $3 billion to Arconic. Because they loved technology and they nurtured it and they took it. Let me give you another one closer to home that was me. After extrusions, a couple years later, they added the forgings business to it. And I don't know if you can see in that picture. It's a little tough because it's kind of small. What you're looking at there is the bulkhead of an F-35. There's 6 of them that hold the F-35 fighter jet together wrapped around the engine. It is the second largest forging on Earth. I should say closed die forging on Earth. So it's one big shape like a cookie cutter. It's 21 foot long, it's 7 feet high, and at its max width, it's 2.5 feet wide. This is a massive forging. They can be made out of either aluminum or titanium. was a young engineer who was in his late 20s named Dustin Bush, who grew up in Parma. Now he graduated up into Avon Lake, works out of the Cleveland forging plant, where they have the largest forge in North America. It's 50,000 tons. It is literally 5 stories tall and 7 stories down. And in his late 20s, he figured out how to create forgings that move from being 5 feet long to 20 feet long using a thing called multi-segment die technology. He's a passionate American. He's a patriot. Tried to take it to Lockheed as they were designing the F-35. They kicked him out. So instead, he went to Airbus, who was trying to take weight out of the A380, and said, hey, it's a huge piece in the back wing that holds the wing together. I can probably take 500 to 600 pounds out of your plane if you make this in one solid piece instead of machining a bunch of plates with things. And Airbus was like, we're all over it. Gave him a shot, ran the demo, did it. One tool cost $2 million. And they did it at Airbus, and they won all the business on the A380, the back and rear spar. Dustin then dragged the JPO, the Joint Program Office, from the Defense Department and Lockheed together and just took him into the plant and said, you see this A380 inner rear spar? I can do the exact same thing for you on the F-35. When he did that, they were like, whoa, he took 450 pounds out of the F-35. If anybody knows structure in the defense, it was the #1 weight reduction on that plane from LRIP 1 to LRIP 2. Okay, long story, why did I say that? First, if you ever get a chance to go see that forge in Cleveland and see that part, because they have it on display, take it. It is super impressive, as well as a slew of other things that they do there that you have to be an American citizen to go in and see, but it's really, really cool. You can go do that. When I came into the business, though, I didn't know a lot about it. I had some fun because that forge broke. It cracked right down the middle of the base structure. It was built in 1953, by the way, so if anybody says you can't run old equipment, no, you can run old equipment. It made it right up until 2009 from 1953, okay? But now it cracked, it was all misaligned, we couldn't use it anymore. The whole business of forgings was only $250 million in my portfolio, and the rebuild would cost $100 million and take 2 years, 1 year to tear it down, and a whole nother year to put it up. So the board said no. Boy, that's a little depressing, because that was about a third of all of my business, and I just got the business. And so I thought, what can I possibly do? And they go, you're going to have Lockheed and the Defense Department do something they've never done before. We need a 7-year contract. It needs to be 100%. You need a price increase. You need all this stuff. So I went to a guy named Larry Lawson, who was running Lockheed Aerospace at the time. He and I met a year before on the first week I took over the forgings business when I was introduced to it, when they hit me with $1 billion claim for a quality problem on the F-22 on titanium bulkheads, which turned out to not be our problem. By the way, that's another lesson. Anytime the government or anybody hits you with a quality claim, fight it like crazy. And they have to prove it. That's a little tip, like icing on the cake. But in any event, I went to Larry, and we had a lot of history. And I go, Larry, I got a problem. I need you to give me this contract, and it needs to be extended, or I'm not rebuilding that forge. And by the way, I need you to come and talk to my board. Long story short, he did. Not only did he do that, when it was all done and we had rebuilt the thing, he came and he was the guest speaker. And we had a huge celebration, putting that thing together. And to this day, every single big bulkhead on that F-35, which is clipping at 150 units or ship sets a month or a year, so multiply that by 6 on these massive forges, and it has anchored that plant in Cleveland and has kept just that business alone has probably kept 150 people out of 700 in the aerospace plant going, even through ups and downs. Amazing jobs, amazing technology. It's a UAW plant. It's crusty. That plant was built in 1917, and yet they are making some of the most advanced things in the world. Big net lesson there as well. Don't give up on these ancient old industries. They can still be innovative. They can still do things that no one else does. I don't have time for that third one, so I'm going to skip that one. But if anybody wants to after the fact, I can tell you about the geared turbofan. That front fan blade on Pratt & Whitney's geared turbofan engine, first time ever in the history of jet engines, that fan blade is not titanium and it's not carbon fiber. So if you're intrigued, come find me later. All right. Well, I gave you a little bit of the history at Alcoa, which became Arconic, and then the whole Elliott group. And in the midst of it, one of the things that Elliott was doing And look, they do what they do. They look at income statements and they basically said, hey, Alcoa, Arconic, we think you put a lot of money into innovation and a lot of other things that you don't get a return for. And so we're going to cut your innovation. And there was a technology center, used to be, in New Kensington, Pennsylvania. When I joined Alcoa, it had 700 people in it. When the Elliott Group initially took over it, we had reduced it down to 500. 1 year after they took over the board, it was down to 300, and 2 years later, they shut the whole thing down, which probably made some money in the short term, but it has crippled them for future innovation. I'll leave it at that, but as I saw all this playing out, I'm like, this is not consistent with my core values. And at the end of the day, you have to appreciate the values of the firm you're working. I proudly wear my Amcor logo. I wore my Alcoa logo. I'll wear it in the grocery store and make the case that, look, we're doing something good for the world. And when you stop being able to say that about the company you work for whatever reason, give it a good look. And I'm not a grasshopper. I talked to headhunters just a little bit, but I never took them. I never took them seriously. Finally, I took this one seriously. I got a call. And I got a call from Amcor. Amcor is a company that, has anybody ever heard of Amcor? I mean, besides Gojo? Okay, a few people. We are a $13 billion company that almost all of you, I guarantee you, have held our product in your hand maybe once or twice in the last week and didn't even know it. If you've ever held a Gatorade, a Powerade, a Pure Leaf tea, a Snapple in your hand, you've held our product. But our CEO tells the board in the street he sells boring. And our entire mission is we will help our customers succeed. And we'll win when they win. I'm like, okay, well, that's pretty cool. I knew a bit about packaging. I'd run the rolled products group at Alcoa. We made body stock, end and tab. We made aseptic foil. So I was familiar with cans. In a prior life, I'd worked with Tetra Pak and some others. And I'm like, okay, packaging, plastic packaging. We all listened to The Graduate. By the way, I'm going to date you guys. Anybody remembers the movie The Graduate? You know it's all about plastics, right? And I'm like, really? Plastics? I thought people, the plastics get a bad rap. And aluminum has this great story. It's recyclable and all this stuff. So you really... And the CEO goes, well, just meet with me. And I'd actually known him. I'd met him before, years before. But he goes, come talk to me. And so I talked to him, and he goes, Eric, if you want to change the world, if you actually want to make a difference, and you don't just want to sell platitudes and, green smear, whatever you're doing, and try to fake anybody out, then if you really are serious, then you will commit to what we're going to try to do, which is get every single food, beverage, and medicinal package into PET. I was like, really? What the heck are you talking about? And he goes, no, you're an engineer. Look at the math. Now, you probably can't read it up here, but I actually indirectly knew about this because working at Alcoa and the Aluminum Association, we had spent tens of millions of dollars doing studies and coming up with all the marketing that we did to say aluminum cans were better than PET. But here's what we did know. PET, what this bottle is made out of, this package is 100% recyclable. If you put it in the recycling bin, every single molecule that I'm holding in my hand can come back in to your hand as a bottle. That's not true for aluminum. Conversely, the entire bottle, if you can read it up here, you probably can't, but you see the big thing, made from 100% recycled plastic. PET bottles, for almost all applications, there's a few that the FDA says can't do it, but almost all, certainly all the beverage and food, can be made from 100% recycled material. Physically impossible with aluminum because the body is a 3000 series, the end and tab is a 5000 series. They get all massively recycled with, I'm not even going to tell you how many BTUs of natural gas energy to delacquer them and then melt them and turning them into holding furnaces and then realloying furnaces. The most you can theoretically do with an aluminum can is 67%. You'll notice that's why that industry doesn't ever promote 100% PCR in anything, because they can't physically do it with physics. So you can actually recycle the whole thing, and you can make it out of 100% PCR, which is great. But then you get to greenhouse gases. This package, even if I make it out of 100% virgin material, has a 70% lower greenhouse gas footprint than aluminum. And I won't get into the math now, but just think about this. In the processing of this, I have to take resin pellets to 300 degrees for about 7 minutes. In the processing of aluminum, I have to take aluminum to 1,400 degrees for 2 hours using natural gas furnaces. And don't even get me started on how they make aluminum in smelters using carbon anodes. The physics is there. It is up to us and our industry to do a much better job of marketing and selling this. So the lesson I'm going to learn there, and some of you will have heard it in your own industries and sectors, is no matter how daunting the fight is, if you know it's the right thing, be willing to take it on. I actually believe in this. And I'm going to do my part, as Amcor will, and the whole industry is going to try to step up and do it. And as I tell summer interns when they come in, or new employees, yeah, you can get on Twitter and make a video, you can go to rallies and complain about packaging, you can do whatever you want. The fact is, human beings are going to get their food and beverage in packaging, and their medicine and everything else. And we have an option to do something that's almost 100% sustainable. Why don't you fight for that? You want to get waste out of rivers, you want to get waste off the side of your streets, and you want to actually drop greenhouse gases, then this is the way to go. There's a fight worth fighting, no matter how daunting it seems. And that's why, I am so glad to partner with our customers. I'll stop there. I got some other cool stories about it. Years ago, we partnered with Method soap. This is a Method soap ball. This is 100% recycled material as well. That was what they're leading sales with. And now we're working with others all the way back to Gojo on projects to take it there as well. We have the technology, and we have customers that want it. Now you have end consumers that want it. All we need to do as a whole sector, and all of you included, is get the PCR. So I have one other request for you, and it's this. Whenever you hold a plastic bottle in your hand, and okay, also an aluminum can or a glass bottle, don't ever let yourself put it in the trash can. Put it in the recycling bin. You mentioned that you came to our plant in Bellevue, Ohio. They use a lot of recycled material in the products they make there. They actually get the recycled material from an evergreen plant in Clyde, Ohio, just 5 miles down the street. That plant employs about 300 people in Ohio making pellets out of PCR. They get none of their material from Ohio. It all comes from Michigan. And I don't like losing to Michigan on anything. Anything. So let's figure that out. But I'll stop there. All right, take any questions.
That's good. Test. Eric, appreciate your time today. One question here is the workforce availability is a significant issue locally, and we were talking about that and regionally. So as a manufacturer speaking today, what are you seeing in that area, and what is Amcor doing to address that concern?
Yeah, workforce availability is huge. I employ in my businesses a little over 6,000 people, and we have plus or minus 600 to 700 open positions. It's very local. I have some geographies where I don't really have an issue. We pay well, we're non-unionized, we have good benefits, we have a good work environment. Ames, Iowa, no problem getting any employees. In fact, average tenure 25 years. Orlando, Florida, same thing. Bellevue, Ohio, or Columbus, Ohio, I cannot find employees. And on any given shift, if I may need 50 people to show up to a shift, on any given shift, 5 or 6 just won't show up, and I'm shutting lines down. And there's a variety of reasons that goes on. Actually, I think it's because the economy is very robust in Ohio, and so people that are willing to work have lots of choices, but we've got a lot of people that just aren't working. And that's something we got to address, as a nation.
Absolutely. How have you and Amcor responded to some of your customers' unforeseen and immediate growth projections, i.e. with Gojo over the last year and a half?
Yeah, it's been wild. You've probably seen the Gojo thing. These guys, as people stopped going to school and stopped working, they started to buy, a lot of beverages in multi-packs, body armor. This thing increased by 30% in demand. And we have 70% of all the bottles Gatorade makes. By the way, it is not entirely my fault if you go into a store and can't get your Gatorade. It is partially my fault you can't do it, but not entirely my fault. The bigger issue is you can't get PET resin. They're on massive allocation. There's a couple big suppliers, and it's just massively allocated. We've actually helped Pepsi go international to find other sources of resin, but even so, we can't meet the demand. So there's a bit there. The quick answer is, you've got to be as responsive as you can and solve problems every day. We have turned on every single bit of capacity we have, and as early as we could, we started to add capacity. It takes a while, and we've had to think absolutely creatively and work in a very integrated way with our customers, doing things we had not done before or our customers had not done before. I'll give you one example. In Mountaintop, Pennsylvania, we have a plant that's literally inside the Pepsi plant. It's one of the big fillers they have there with 6 blow molders that run right through the wall into their plant. But at any given time, 40% of the hours, a couple of the blow molders don't run. We worked together to figure out how to put a huge palletizer on their side of the wall that we ran so we could run our blow molders into pallets that they could then put on trucks and ship to another one of their filling locations. And we had never done anything like, we'd never done anything like that before. One of literally dozens of examples of figuring out, working collaboratively with your customers on how to do things differently.
And lastly, just because of time concerns, and with your wife, she's an Ohio senator, represents us here in Wayne County. Eric, what could we do so that your plant here in Ohio is getting its recyclables from the state of Ohio and not Michigan? And we talked about that today.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. Look, the data says that states that have deposit laws recycle at 90% rates. Ohio has bin collection, which is better than some states, but doesn't have a deposit law, and it recycles at about the 35 to 40% rate. States that don't have deposit laws and don't have bins recycle at under 15%. Now, I'm not going to go so far as to say that deposit laws are the right answer. There are other ways to do it. But at a minimum, in the state of Ohio, as we're thinking about all sorts of rules and regulations that go on out there, what you support, what you don't support, we should ensure that there is at least a recycling option in every county, and that there's a lot of money that comes in this whole refuse collection right now and all waste management, and a lot of it gets apportioned out, that we apportion out enough that you can have MRFs, material recovery facilities, at least supporting every county to give people the option, so that if you do put this in the recycling bin, it actually goes and gets recycled. That's a first step that I think we can all support at the state level, and county and local.
Excellent. Is there any other questions for Eric? If not, thank you. So you got one there, Bob, in the back real quick. Bob Gessner, go ahead.
Yep. That's a great question. Honestly, for that cracker to work, it's going to need low-priced gas. If it doesn't have low-priced gas, then it's not going to turn on. So the number one thing we can do, look, people, I'll be very candid, to help stimulate the economy across the country, number one, do absolutely everything we can at the federal and state level to get energy prices down. We have the energy. We've got to get it down, and that then feeds crackers and other things on the feedstock. So we've got to get that price down. Because where it is now and going into this winter, if natural gas prices are at that level, who knows what's going to happen to that cracker. And number two, we have to get people working again. We've got to get them preferring to go to a job, driving a truck, working a night shift, rather than watching Netflix on their couch. And right now, across the country, 5 million people have pulled themselves out of the workforce and are watching Netflix on the couch. And that's got to stop.
That's a pretty good answer right there, Eric. Thank you for your time. We appreciate it. We'll take a 5-minute break, and then we'll have our last speaker.
As you know, everyone we invite to speak at the Wayne Economic Forum has some kind of connection to Worcester. In John Hamilton's case, his wife, Lori, was born and raised in Worcester. Not only that, but his wife, Lori, and my wife, Mary, while in their teens, modeled clothes for the well-known Molly Miller's store in downtown Worcester. John grew up in Toledo and earned his bachelor's degree in aeronautical and astronautical engineering from The Ohio State University in 1984. That's where he met Dan Freeman's sister, Lori Freeman, whom he married in 1986. After graduation, John joined Boeing as a design engineer and later earned a master's degree in business administration from Seattle University. He also completed the aviation safety management program at the University of Southern California and flight crew training for the 757 and 767 airplanes. In 2007, he graduated from Columbia University's Senior Executive Program. In addition, John is a licensed professional engineer in the state of Washington and an associate fellow of the American Institute of Aeronautics and Astronautics. He held a variety of leadership roles in the 757 and 737 programs and in air safety investigation and customer service. From 2006 to 2012, he served as the vice president and chief engineer of the 737 program with responsibility for the safety and product integrity of the airplane's design, including product strategy, the integration of engineering design, and product compliance to Boeing and regulatory standards and requirements. He was named vice president of Boeing Commercial Airplanes Regulatory Administration in February of 2012. In 2013, John was given additional responsibility for aviation safety and aviation security. In April 2016, John was named Senior Vice President of Engineering for Boeing Commercial Airplanes. In this role, he led a team of nearly 20,000 engineers around the world. He was responsible for engineering design, certification, and safety activities for all commercial airplane models, their derivatives, and post-delivery upgrades. As the commercial airplanes engineering leader, John was also responsible for identifying and implementing best practices, as well as ensuring that the right engineering skill sets were in place for designing, integrating, building, testing, certifying, and delivering Boeing airplane products. John is past chairman of the Board of Governors for the Flight Safety Foundation based in Alexandria, Virginia. He has served on this board since 2013 and was chairman of the board from 2017 to 2019. Separately, he's also a member of the Dean's Advisory Panel at The Ohio State University's College of Engineering. John Hamilton testified before Congress along with Boeing CEO Dennis Muhlenberg in October 2019. He retired as Senior Vice President of Engineering for Boeing Commercial Airplanes in December 2019. The new head of Boeing Commercial Airplanes, Stan Deal, broke the news internally in a memo to employees, which said John had planned to retire last year, but we asked him to stay on to help us with the 737 MAX investigations and return to service efforts. We're immensely grateful to John for lending his expertise and leadership during a very challenging time. In a statement to CNBC, Deal said Hamilton has exemplified Boeing's values of safety, quality, and integrity throughout his 35 years at the company. Now, after a career dedicated to excellence, John is retiring. His guidance over the past year caps an outstanding career that covered multiple programs and functions, including serving as chief project engineer for the 757, the next generation 737, and the Navy's Poseidon P-8A, plus leading the aviation safety organization, and finally, as the Boeing Commercial Airplanes engineering leader. John's strong commitment to safety will be one of his lasting legacies, Deal said. After retirement, John started Air Flying Partners, LLC in May of last year to provide technical and management consulting services. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome John Hamilton. So, my first question, John, is what attracted you to study aeronautical and astronautical engineering?
Well, first of all, it's great to be here, and it's a tough act to follow three great speakers, but Dee said this was just going to be a fireside chat, and it would be nice and easy on you, but I'm glad to be here. So my grandfather was an engineer, And he was actually vice president of the Toledo Edison company, local electrical company. And for most of my life, or as a kid, I never really knew what an engineer did, but it kind of sounded interesting. And I started looking into it. You know, you take all those aptitude classes in high school, and I was good in math and science. My mom wanted to be an accountant, and I had no desire to be an accountant. I wanted to be an engineer. So I was actually at that time looking to be a chemical engineer because the petroleum industry was taking off. Plastics might have been part of that as well. But I got to my second year of college and started taking organic chemistry. And I'm sure a few of you in the audience have taken organic chemistry. And I started thinking, what the heck am I doing here? And it was one of the first times I think I really did some reflection, which became a key part as I went through my career of what was my plan, how did it work out, and why, or not work out. And I realized I had no passion really to go into chemistry. That wasn't really, I had a great high school chemistry teacher, but that wasn't really where my passion was. And what really was driving my passion was flying. You know, airplanes, watching these things take off at airports. I used to go out to airports and, you know, watch them take off. Also the Apollo missions to the moon. I mean, as a young kid watching that, I remember watching Neil Armstrong, another Ohio guy, you know, step foot on the moon, and that really excited me, and it really drove my passion. So I switched to aeronautical engineering and started taking those classes, and I loved every one of them. I then started taking classes in computer science. I ended up working towards a second degree in computer science engineering as well, and that was kind of how I got there.
Wonderful. So, in 1986, I guess is when you joined Boeing.
84.
1984. 1986 is when you got married. So 1984 is when you joined Boeing. What was the first task you were assigned?
So my first, I'll caveat it with be careful when you ask for something, you might actually get it. So I was a senior at Ohio State. Boeing came and actually interviewed me on campus. And I said I wanted to be a computer-aided design engineer. Now, take you back to 1984, and laptops or desktops at the time, the cutting edge was an IBM XT with 10 kilobytes of memory. So today we talk gigabytes and terabytes. This was a very, cutting edge at the time. But most of the engineers at that time were still drawing things up on paper or mylar, which is plastic paper. And there weren't many people really designing things yet at that time on computers and simulating. And so I said, I want to be part of this. Well, Boeing had cored up a small group of people whose job was to start doing computer-aided design for different parts of the airplane. And so I got to do that, and I was simulating various mechanisms on every commercial airplane we were making at the time. I was designing parts, showing how you could produce them from the digital package. And then in my spare time, I was writing software programs that did beam analysis and simple analysis. And I was taking around to all the senior engineers who were spending hours and hours running through all these analyses. And I'd show them at lunchtime. I said, look, if you use a software program, you could start doing this and run multiple iterations within a matter of hours and be done. And so that was my first job. And the reason I said, be careful what you ask for, you might get it, about a year after I started, I was bored, completely bored with the job, because I was working on all these piece parts. And I remember my brother telling me, he says, why do you want to go work for Boeing? It's a big company, and you're only going to be working on small parts of the airplane. And so I talked with a couple of people in my group that had been around the company a while, and I ended up going over to the support side, working with the part of the company. They worked with the airlines on problems they had on the airplane in service. And so suddenly I went from doing this computer simulation work to being at home, and my wife Lori will appreciate this. I would get calls at 3 in the morning, somewhere halfway around the world, and somebody would say, the computers have gone crazy on this airplane. And so you'd be waking up and you'd try to get your wherewithal and your thoughts together and I used to always keep, paper by the nightstand there with kind of questions, just so I could just fill out some basic information. But it was exciting because it really connected me with, we were a global company. I was working with customers in Singapore and Brunei, Australia, Africa, and that really drove a lot of my interest as well.
Wow. So I'm sure a lot of people here are curious to know, what did it take a lad from Ohio to rise to the level that you did at Boeing?
You know, I'm inspired by the speakers we've already had today, and I'm sure there's a lot of other business leaders here in the audience that probably can recognize all this. But as I started going through my career and doing some reflections, there was always 2 or 3 people that, as I was getting promoted, that I knew probably thought they should have gotten that job, or were certainly a good candidate for that job. And we were all good technical engineers. We were all became good business leaders as well. And one of my former bosses kind of pulled me aside one time and kind of mentioned this to me, but he said, it isn't so much what job or title you have, it's who you are. It's your character. It's your habits, your practices, your priorities that you set on a day-to-day basis that really set you apart. Because those what drive your hard work. I mean, there's been some talk, I think, from Misha and Eric about, doing more than what your job says. And I always tried to do that. I always tried to, my job was this, I'd always tried to broaden it from flight controls into avionics and into cold weather operations and things like that, where I learned more and more. But I think it was more my character, is what I learned that really set me apart, that allowed me to keep growing and being promoted.
Wonderful. So,
and Dee, just say on top of that, so I have to, I grew up in Ohio, and I look at my Midwest roots as kind of being maybe a part of that, and that hard work and honesty are some of the core values that I grew up with as a kid and stay with me all through my career.
Absolutely. So here's a little bit of a tough question. How did you manage to live through the responsibility of delivering really bad news up your chain of command for system failures that have been caused by your people? And particularly if you could address and talk about the importance of integrity that goes with bad news.
Well, it's oftentimes easy to tell good news up the chain. And I've had a lot of different leaders through the years that reacted differently when you tell them bad news. And, there's some people that want to sugarcoat it and give this optimistic time frame, I can solve it right now. But I think the first thing is letting them know you got a problem. Oftentimes, I used to say, go ugly early, which really meant get the bad news out there early. Don't surprise them. I may not have all the information, but I would usually say, I'm going to come back, within a day or whatever it was, sometimes hours, with more information. And I might not have a solution yet. And some bosses, leaders, were just antsy to, get to the solution point, and you just couldn't commit to that. And part of it was also, as I'd grown through the company, I had done a lot of these jobs, and I knew the processes, and I knew what they were going to have to work through, and I knew it wasn't just under our control all the time. There were a lot of outside stakeholders that were going to be affecting us. Supply chain, certainly the regulatory agencies, and we deal with the FAA primarily on a day-to-day basis, but we actually certify the airplanes around the world, so you're dealing with the Chinese regulators, the European regulators, the Brazilian regulators, and they may all have slightly different requirements, and getting that all nailed down. Now you try to harmonize the requirements as best you can, but that's not always possible. In fact, sometimes we've seen things where there's been some competition of who's got the gold standard out there. You know, the FAA, or is it the Europeans, or the Chinese? And some people will just kind of hold their cards close to the chest and won't necessarily all tell you the requirements that you have to meet. And so it becomes a little bit of, is this going to be acceptable if we keep it, you know, at this level? And pinning them down sometimes can be very difficult. I can tell you stories where I've walked into many conference rooms in China and met with a Chinese regulator, and you get into a conference room in China during the day, and there might be 1 or 2 Boeing people there. I might have an interpreter there with me as well, and there'll be 10 members of the CAC there with some interpreters, and it's very formal. It's almost a scripted talk that goes on, and nothing really gets agreed to. And the person, the head of the delegation, oftentimes will only speak Chinese and have the interpreter communicate, because he doesn't want to be embarrassed in any way in how he says something, but he also doesn't want to say something unintentionally that might, you know, commit to something. But then I quickly learned that you go out to dinner with these guys, and they speak great English. And it became to the point where I would tell the guys, I said, let me just take them out to dinner, and I can talk to them and get a real close idea. I mean, they would say, don't quite hold me to it, but here's what I need you to do. And I said, great. At least now I've got something I can work with. Whereas you'd come out of the meeting and you didn't know where you sat. And so, you know, that's one of the things you learn as you've actually gone through that experience a few times. It's like, okay, we'll do the meeting, but then hopefully I can get to the dinner and get the real answer.
So true.
Yeah.
So true. The day after you retired, you wrote a letter to a young John Hamilton that had just joined Boeing. And in it you wrote, you'll be put into circumstances that will stretch your abilities far beyond what you thought yourself capable of. Can you describe some of the biggest stretches of your career?
So I don't know where to start on that one. I got stretched in so many different ways. I'll start off by saying, you know, Boeing is a large global brand, and there's pros and cons with that. When I walked into a room or an airline, a foreign regulator, I was the man from Boeing. And that opened doors for me in many ways that other people didn't get. You know, I got to meet heads of state. I met presidents, former presidents, people who will be running for president, I know, going forward, ambassadors, you know, met a whole lot of senators and congressmen, but also a lot of dignitaries overseas. And it really was, you know, awestruck in that, you know, here I am, this kid from Ohio, and I'm here meeting with President Xi in China. And not a lot of people get to do that. Wow. But on the con side, you can walk in and some countries kind of intertwine the US government and Boeing like this. And they might have an issue with the US government, and they think, well, you can control the government, so we want you to go do this. And you're trying to politely say, no, I really can't do that, but I'll try to see what I can do. I'll give you an example. You know, China is really good at this, and you know, oftentimes things that happen with China only happen in political settings. If you notice, when China buys a whole bunch of airplanes, it's usually when there's a delegation visiting our president or vice versa, because they want the big grandiose thing. So, the Macs right now, they're trying to get it recertified in China. And the key there is, they've done most of the work, is the Biden administration going to try to open up talks with China, after some pretty rough approaches in the past few years. And so that's going to be the key there. China buys about 1 out of every 3 737s out there. They have a growing domestic fleet, and so it's an important customer for Boeing. And that's going to be a key item. But it's all going to be tied to some political effort there going forward. I'd say, Dee, just to go on some of the other stretches is, when you lead a large team of 20,000 people from all over the world, you get stretched pretty thin. And so knowing where you got to spend your time and where to look at things and where to rely on your team is really important. And, I had obviously a couple of design centers in the Seattle area, in Everett and Renton. I had folks down in Southern California, Charleston. I had small groups in Philadelphia and Arizona. And then I had a design center in Moscow, a design center in Kiev, and then 3 locations in India. And not to mention some other smaller pockets. And trying to keep all those people connected and running in one direction. I think it was Misha who was talking about culture. It's a tough task, especially when now you're talking about not just one country culture, but multiple country cultures. And how does one word, maybe in America, come across as when I say that in another country, it means something totally different. And so learning that really was interesting.
I understand fully. I'm going to skip one of my questions here because to follow on about China, how do you feel about China as a customer versus a competitor for Boeing?
Great. Well, one thing in China is, and I can't remember if it was Eric or somebody else kind of brought, or maybe it was Dave, brought it up about, China has a 100-year vision. And whoever said it was talking about, in the U.S., we're thinking about the next quarter. And maybe the next, political cycle. But in China, it's 100-year. When they say we're going to create an aerospace industry, they will create an industry. It was remarkable for me to go to China in the years leading up to the Beijing Olympics in 2008, I think it was, to watch how they transformed Beijing. And even when the Olympics were getting ready to be held, I think we were talking about carbon emissions earlier, but the air pollution in Beijing, because it's kind of in a valley with mountains around it, gets really bad. And what did they do? They just said, you can't drive on certain days of the week. And they just mandate it, and everybody complies. And so, there's some benefits, I'll say, of when they can say this and the student body right, and everybody goes that way. But, of course, there's a lot of downside. The other thing about China is you can meet with a person one day, and they're working for the airline. And you're helping them as an airline, as a customer, through how to operate the airplane and fix the airplane or whatever. And a year later, you come back, and they're working for as a regulator. And so now you got a different relationship with them. And, China wanted everything that we could show them on the 787. And so what I told our team was, I said, you got to kind of put this in a few buckets. There's the stuff we're going to share with them, which isn't a lot of IP. There's the stuff we'll show them in a room, but not let them have. And there's the stuff where we're just not going to show them. Because they do a lot of IP piracy over there. And so you're working with them as a regulator, and you have a certain onus to provide them that so that they will actually certify your product. And then you'll come back maybe 2 years later, and they're working for the Communist Central Party. which controls everything. So now it's like, okay, well, I have to go get the airline to buy the airplane, but then I have to go to this other company called the NDRC to approve the purchase of that, and that's ultimately controlled by the central party. And so there's this whole mix there of how they operate. So COMAC is their company that's building airplanes, the C919. They've got a few airplanes that they're test flying. They kind of look like a 737 or an A320. Oh, you got it there. Yeah. And you know, somebody once earlier asked me today, and I said, well, if you look at the nose, it looks a lot like an A320 nose. And it could be because the A320 they have a final production site in Tianjin, China. And so it's very possible they have a lot of access to drawings and other things. But I said, you know, they've had some challenges with flight testing and certainly certifying it. It will eventually come to market, and they will mandate that the Chinese airlines buy it. And some of the other regional carriers like Mongolia and Indonesia and possibly Singapore. But what I've always told my team is we've got to be one step ahead. In other words, they're going to use today's technology, and it's going to be about the equivalent of a 737 we were producing about 10 years ago. And I said, so we've got to keep improving our products so that when we're competing with them, we're not competing with 10-year-old technology, we're competing with going forward. But they will learn from this, and they want to build a wide-body airplane as well, and my expectation is they will. But you know, fast forward 20 years, there won't be a duopoly anymore. There will be COMAC, there will be Boeing, there will be Airbus, and you know, it'll just be the paradigm is shifted, and we have to deal with that.
Yep. I'm going to go back to 2019, where after the difficulties with the 737 MAX, monthly deliveries of Boeing airplanes fell to about 1/3 of Airbus. Where are they now? So there's a chart that I was looking at that told you, where if you look at the red lines, they're deliveries of Boeing airplanes.
Is the far right 2020 or is it?
It's all 2019.
Oh, all 19.
It starts about March is when the deliveries start dropping, and then they went to a low point towards later in the year. So my question is, how is Boeing doing now, and how are Boeing monthly deliveries with some of the other problems that's had?
Okay, so I think, you know, obviously what you see starting in April is the effect of the MAX grounding. And, you know, when you suddenly take out, I think we were, you know, roughly about almost 600 airplanes a year that we were delivering, suddenly go to zero, that's going to dramatically affect that. You also, in 2020, you'll see, of course, the impact of COVID, which probably impacted us both about the same. Now, COVID has its dramatic input on the international travel, and still does today. The airlines really don't have needs for wide-body airplanes right now, and most of them are trying to defer the airplanes out 2-3 years until it recovers. The single-aisle market, 737s, the A320s, is coming back. It's about 60% of capacity probably of what it was pre-COVID. But that is restoring, and that's going to keep growing. The biggest problem at bringing capacity online is pilots, though. You know, somebody talked about, you know, there's a lot of people that went out of the market, and a lot of pilots left the marketplace, and trying to get new pilots in is actually a constraint. You need about 10 crews or about 20 pilots for every airplane, roughly. That's about the average. So if you're going to sell, you know, 200 airplanes, they're going to need, you know, you can do the math, you know, that many pilots. And so there's a big growth need for pilots that are going to have to support some of the airlines' growth needs. But, you know, today it's still Boeing's behind. You know, Airbus has continued to keep their rates up on the A320, the A321. Boeing, I think in September, they just did earnings yesterday, so I can say some of this because I was worried about the timing here. But they were delivering about 19 airplanes, I think, in September of the 737 MAX. They've delivered about 200 airplanes since the MAX grounding got lifted, and there's about 200 airplanes that were in service that are out flying. So there's about 400 MAXs now flying around. But it's going to take time. I've actually get together with the head of the 3.7 program periodically, and he used to work for me years ago. But I've always told him, I said, your biggest challenge is going up in rate. So to go from 16 to 30 and back up to 42, getting the supply chain, getting everything going, and just getting the cadence down in the factory is going to be vitally important. And getting from 16 to 21, that's kind of your next big step, because at 21 you're building basically one airplane a day, and so now the mechanic is out on the floor is doing basically the same thing every day, and he can repeat it and get very good at it. And then you kind of go through some intervals until you really get to 42, where now you got 2 lines going. And so working through that is the big thing. But the Boeing is put together some plans to get back up in rate, to try to get back. They've got, I think, over 4,000 airplanes in backlog on the 3.7, and so they will get back in rate, and the plane is flying very reliably now. So.
And good point about one line doing an airplane a day, 2 lines doing 2 airplanes a day, and so forth. I'm going to skip over the next question here and go to, you were involved with air safety investigations and were chairman of the board of the governors for the Flight Safety Foundation for a couple of 3 years, based in Alexandria. What are the salient things you learned in those investigations?
First of all, they're tragedies. And that was always the thing that I always try to communicate to the team was, this is a tragedy. People lost their lives. And time stopped for those families and friends involved in that. And we can never, bring that back. But I led our accident investigation team for 6 years, going out to crash sites, picking through the wreckage. It's kind of like forensic medicine a little bit, where you're starting to try to figure out, okay, what was happening. And with today's recorders on the airplane, when I started at Boeing, they had 5-channel recorders, which meant they recorded 5 things on the airplane. Today, it's thousands of parameters. So once you always see the focus on getting the recorders, because there's so much information on there that you can really start pulling things together. But any accident is never due to one cause. And I can go through many different accidents and probably lay out for you the 6 or 7 things that contributed to the accident, which may start with management culture. I think Misha had talked about culture. Culture and airline and a manufacturer, anywhere, supplier, can have an impact. And it can be the start of a set of dominoes that start falling. But it may be also some maintenance action that didn't take place correctly. It may have been a design issue that made some bad assumptions. It may have been a pilot who didn't follow procedures, or just turned the airplane the wrong way in a stressful environment. And it can be a number of things. And so when you're involved in an investigation, you're not looking for the cause. You're looking for the 6 or 7 things that really contribute to this. And then what we always say is, let's break the chain in as many places as we can and prevent it from ever happening again. So we don't go fix one thing, we try to fix 6 things. And sometimes, as a Boeing employee, we could fix maybe 1, 2 of those pieces, but some of the other were out of our control. And what I will tell you is the Aviation Safety Committee, aviation in general is a very small group of people in reality, but the Aviation Safety Group is even smaller industry-wide. And Boeing and Airbus, for that matter, Bombardier and Embraer, we don't compete on safety. We share information on that, and that's one thing you won't see us compete on. And we actually get together several times a year and share safety data, so that I don't want Airbus to have a similar accident that happened on one of our airplanes, and vice versa. I used to call up my counterpart at Airbus shortly after any accident and say, is there anything I could do to help you guys? If you need information, let me know. And they oftentimes would do the same. So we compete on a lot of fronts, but not on safety. And so some of those links in the chain, you need to work at an industry level or maybe with regulators that get together as a group also and talk about, hey, we need to change the regulations across the board on all this. There's a United Nations organization called ICAO, which basically governs air travel worldwide. And they're based out of Montreal, but sometimes we have to go to there and get ICAO to change some of their rules and regulations. And as a member of the Flight Safety Foundation, which is an independent organization that's global, sometimes we've taken on things that are industry-wide. Upset recovery training, which doesn't matter if it happened on 3.7, a 5.7, a 320, or a 350. It's all kind of common information. And so we tried to develop that and get that out. So by working with the Flight Safety Foundation, I was looking for where are some of the things that are really industry related beyond Boeing that we need to work more as a global industry that can really improve air travel.
That's wonderful to hear. Last couple of things. How has Teddy Roosevelt affected your leadership philosophy?
Oh, you got it up there. So I think you had up there before, it was Captain Lamplaugh's statement. I used to keep a couple things on my desk. The previous one, if you didn't get a chance to read it, was aviation is not inherently dangerous, but to an even greater degree than the sea, is terribly unforgiving of any carelessness, incapacity, or neglect. And I always kept it as a constant reminder of what we were doing.
That's one
that one there, yeah. That's actually a picture of, I think, of what I had on my desk. But, and it was just kind of a constant reminder that people are counting on everything we did. Lives matter, and you know, we had to be really focused on the details and making sure we really dotted all the I's and crossed all the T's. Teddy Roosevelt was the other thing, which it's a speech he gave back in the early 1900s called "The Man in the Arena," and it always inspired me. And I don't know, you have it up there, but you know, basically, I'll paraphrase it, but he says, it's not the critic that counts. It's not the man standing on the sideline pointing out where everybody did something wrong. It's the man who's mired in dust and sweat and dirt, who's in the arena trying valiantly to succeed, who knows he's going to err or errs, but learns from it, keeps moving forward, and at the end, either succeeds knowing he gave it his best, or fails knowing he gave it all his best. And he's kind of pity to the person who neither knows victory or defeat. And that always stood out as, you know, when you're running an organization like 20,000 people, you can kind of sit yourself up into the corner office and shield yourself, I'll say. And, you know, some people like to just manage upwards. I always felt it was important to be on the floor visible. And so I would always block out time, and my assistant used to always, she learned quickly that I was out walking the floor. And she had her hot spots around the floor where she could contact people and say, is he in your area? Because you know, the CEO wants to talk to him now. But I always used to walk the floor and try to know, you can't know 20,000 people. I mean, I would give a lot of talks like this to, 500, 1,000 people. But, I would try to, even when I'm doing something like this, I'm usually walking around the audience and talking to people before the meeting and trying to get to know them. And so I would say a lot of the engineers knew me as a person. And I wasn't just the guy up in the corner office. And, they knew that when a problem or a situation like a crisis comes about, they knew that I was going to be trying to help them out as best I could. I don't want to get in their way. I certainly didn't want to. They knew more than I did at that point. But it was, how can I help? Sometimes it was coming in on a Saturday and buying them pizzas, knowing that they felt supported. But
so you basically being in the arena is what it was all about. So I'm going to go to my last question now, which is, so how has that helped you in times when you're working through a crisis? And that's
okay, and working through, yeah. So you know, when you're in a crisis, the world's spinning pretty fast, and I would tell you the big thing is you've got to communicate more than you ever think, upwards, downwards, and outwards. And so when some of the recent crises that I was involved in, you know, was every day, you know, talking with the team, finding out where they were at, but also knowing, do they need, you know, more skills in a certain area that could help them? Could I bring in some people that have been working in defense and space over to help? Because maybe they were working on some technology that the commercial guys didn't know about. You know, communicating with the board and the leadership of the company about where we're at. And sometimes, you know, they want to know, hey, is this thing going to be over with next week, tomorrow? And I couldn't tell them a good time frame. I said, here's where it is, but, you know, there's a lot of outside stakeholders that are influencing this, and I can't always control them. But I would have daily calls also with regulators, customers, even investors. You know, I would have to go out to the investor community and brief them as well. And, you know, part of it's keeping everybody kind of on the same page. Even retirees, I've learned, you know, are quite invested in Boeing. And so I actually would meet with retirees periodically, you know, and keep them on the same page.
You know, there's a company here in town called Schaeffler, and its motto, or one of its mottos, part of its motto, is lavish communication.
Yes,
and that's exactly
that is so
what you're
true.
talking about. John, I'm going to stop over here and hand it over to Doug Deacon, who's going to moderate your Q&A.
Okay. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, John. If anybody has questions, please fill out those cards. They're walking around to collect them, send them up here. John, I'll just go ahead and say that if you didn't like organic chemistry sophomore year of chemical engineering, be glad you missed out on PChem your junior year.
Yes.
Because that's even tougher. But I had a question for you while they're gathering up cards. You mentioned about managing different, the same technical functional groups in different cultures, but in addition to that, there's also different generations. What challenges did you experience, and any tips, tricks, funky ideas for managing the nerds of different decades?
Well, and there was nerds, and there was other people that were completely different. You'd probably seen these things that say, here's the boomer, and here's what, well, even I should start with the greatest generation, because when I came in, there was actually people from the greatest generation still working. And then you had the boomers, and then Generation X, Y, and millennials. And, they would try to put them in neat little buckets and say, but you can't. And the thing I learned was, I knew a lot of the people that came in around the same time I did, and I could kind of speak their language, but I recognized that we were hiring people, especially in the last 10 years, who were incredibly capable, and they all wanted to be CEO in 5 years. And so I think it was Eric that said, attracting talent. We went after the greatest talent. MIT, Stanford, some of the greatest schools. But our biggest problem was keeping them because they wanted to be CEO. And so we had to kind of think, who do we want to attract that's going to stay with the company for a while. But you think about their tools, and I maybe it was Misha mentioned it about, some people were afraid of computers and didn't want to deal with computers, whereas some of the newer people, don't hand them a piece of paper. They don't even want to see a piece of paper. And so it was dealing with their learning styles, the way they received information. Remote work was another big thing. A lot of the baby boom generation was totally against it that worked at the company. You know, they felt coming into work, you know, the camaraderie, all that was a big part of it. Whereas a lot of the younger generation were really pushing for remote work years ago. And I actually created a guideline about 5 years ago that we had adopted about how to go about remote work, and I think they end up using that quite a bit during these last 2 years. But so there was lots of different challenges that you had to deal with between the generations, and it evolved constantly. So getting out, talking with them, doing crosstalks. I would do crosstalks with, you know, younger employees, just women sometimes, a diverse group of Asians maybe, because I knew they all were looking at things from a different perspective. And the first thing I had to do was get their trust, and then from that, you know, figure out how to work their problems.